So I did not know Canon. I assume that's how it's pronounced. Because they appear to be primarily maybe like a Lost Ark and just different MMOs than what I play. So, but as we look forward to the Riot MMO, which, you know, it's always about the newest MMO with the most potential and the least information. That's where the most of the hype is. So the Riot MMO doesn't even have a name yet. And then Ghostcrawler, of course, being involved in that, a previous director at World of Warcraft. This is a big, long interview. I didn't know who Canon was before this. I think he did a good job with a lot of questions as far as like covering a lot of different ways to play from a large number of backgrounds. A great job of introducing who Greg is, what the plans are for the game, what kind of their lines not to cross are, and referencing it in a way that made it an interesting conversation, even if you have no intention of playing the Riot MMO, the League MMO, as Ghostcrawler called it. I think it's really nice to know that it doesn't, like, we can just talk about MMOs. That's really what I wanted to do this week. I just want to talk about MMOs. I like MMOs. And so there's stuff to be learned there, as we talked about World of Warcraft, as we talked about Final Fantasy, all these different things. A lot of these design answers, the reason we have such different games is that there is no one answer. It's all the answers all the time. So I think that was awesome. I think he did a really good job. I think that, you know, there's definitely some things that I'm sure you would have asked different. There's some things I would have asked different. There's some phrasings that I'm sure may have provoked slightly different answers. But largely a really neat way to meet Canon. Phenomenal opportunity to get to interview Ghostcrawler. That's a big deal. Anybody who's been around the industry that long and has had that much of a footprint in it, the list is just not that big. There's just only so many people that have gotten to lead or be heavily involved in that many IPs. So, pretty cool. I don't typically react to people I've never seen before, because I believe that reactions and stuff are about discussion and adding your point of view, and I don't always agree with them. And so I like to lead with a compliment, because I really don't like posting reactions to like people I don't like. I really enjoyed watching Canon. I really enjoyed what he did. I think he did a great job. I just don't always agree with his phrasing, and so like any criticism is not really directed at him. I think he did a great job. I just, you know, we're all entitled to our opinion. And so I typically like to say that first. And so in a reaction to somebody I know, I introduce them. I say, hey, this is Preach Gaming. These are the amazing things he's known for. And this is why I like his content. And maybe even my history with watching his content, if it's somebody I've watched for a long time or it's somebody that's new to me. And then after that way, if everything that comes out of my mouth after that happens to be me disagreeing with them, it's just about that is just a coincidence that I disagreed with the next 5 things they said. It's not that I aim to sit out and nitpick everything that ever comes out of their mouth for the rest of their lives. So we'll start working our way through this, but this would be very exciting to kind of see Greg Street talk about this. And I think there's some good topics in here as far as like pay models and things like that.
The opportunity to interview Greg Street, aka Ghostcrawler, who is the director of the future Riot MMO RPG. Before getting into this interview, though, there are a couple of things that I do want to mention. First, this is a podcast style interview where Greg and I are pretty much just openly talking, and the focal point around our discussions is around his personal life, as well as his personal preferences, his influences, and his experiences when it comes to the MMO genre, both as a dev and as a player. My goal was to introduce Greg Street the person and give you guys some insight to the man that is going to be directing the most anticipated MMO RPG. Now, some of you guys may know already, if you watched the teaser, that the original cut was about 2 hours and 10 minutes long. In this version that you're going to be seeing, I had to cut it down to like an hour and 20 to 30 minutes. Unfortunately, there were some things that I did have to remove, but some of the cuts were also for the purpose of viewing pleasure, just to make it a little bit more straightforward for you guys, make it a little bit easier to follow. I do want to give a special thanks to Riot for working alongside me with this and allowing me the opportunity to provide this video for you guys. Before starting the video, be sure to check me out on Twitch. I'm streaming on that platform 5 to 6 days a week, and let's begin. Thank you guys for joining me today. I have a super special guest that I've been very, very excited to talk to. Today I'm joined here by Mr. Greg Street himself, aka Ghostcrawler. He's the director of the Riot MMO that's going to come out in like the year 4000 or something, whenever that's going to come out. And today we're just going to be talking about the man himself and his thoughts and talking about some games and his life and things like that. So I'm super excited to do that. Greg, could you maybe give us a quick introduction? Let us know who you are.
Yeah, I'm Greg Street. I'm an American video game developer. I've been making games for a long time. I'd have to count 20-something years, I think. Started off with real-time strategy games, Age of Empires, then went to a little place called Blizzard and worked on World of Warcraft for several years. Managed to leverage that into a job at Riot. I was lead designer on League of Legends for a while. Then I went over and took on a job kind of managing the League of Legends IP because we wanted to do a lot of cool things with it, like make a TV show. And then started an MMO set in the same universe, which is where we are today.
So in this section, I want to talk about just your history. And it's interesting because you kind of have two sides, right? Like you've got the industry side, the work side, and then you've got the gamer side. Maybe we could start with the gamer side real quick. Can you just, I know you mentioned a few games that you played. Can you kind of give us a little bit of info on just your background as a gamer?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm super old school. I've been playing games my whole life. Like I played video games when they were like black and white, black and green screen, old like Pong, Atari 2600, the first NES, then SNES, and then every Nintendo, Xbox, and PlayStation console along the way.
I love hearing all the callbacks, all the nostalgia, but a lot of this kind of gamer cred also ends up sometimes being just a question of like, how long have you been around, right? So a newer game developer may not have played some of those games simply by being younger. So like, I don't know if this is where he's going to go, but just as like a future aside towards these, I would love to know what games they're playing right now. What games have been like their most influential games over the last couple years. And then like what they are most excited to play that is not being published by the company they work for. So like what else are they excited about to really remind us that like a lot of them are just gamers. They're not just excited about their own press releases. They just like games.
A lot of PC games. Again, back when it was like black screen or the monitor yay big till today. It's always been a big part of my life. Back from when it was like pretty uncool to where now it's super mainstream, and was fortunate enough to leverage it into an actual job. And
That's
sometimes,
awesome.
it's funny, I was interviewing someone the other day for a job, and they asked like, oh, one of my concerns is if I get into video games, it's then not going to be fun to play games anymore. And I'm like, oh no, don't worry about that. Like everyone I know still plays a ton of games.
Oh, that's awesome. Despite working for a video game company, I would have thought the same thing. If you work for a company, you're not going to really be able to really play that game. But I guess that's not really the case then.
No, not at all. Like when I was working on WoW, I would like work on the game all day and then go home at night and,
Really?
Yeah.
Did your friends know who you were?
It depended. Like my really close friends knew who I was, but we kind of kept it secret from the whole guild because we didn't want it to be a big thing. And at the time, Blizzard was a little funny about that. If people knew who you were and started kind of stalking you online, you would go into the witness protection program and they would make you move servers and change your character.
Really? Wow.
I don't know if they still do that, but that was their policy at the time, so I kept it super secret.
Right. Okay, well, do you plan on playing the Riot MMO if and when it comes out?
If it comes out, I plan on playing it a lot. Like, seriously, I have people at work already talking about, hey, are we going to make a guild? And I'm like, whoa, slow down.
Okay, so is the MMO genre your bread and butter? Is it your baby? Like, is that what you want? Is that how you identify as a gamer in that genre? Or just are you kind of like, RTS and just this and that, and it's just one of the many that you enjoy doing? Or playing?
Yeah, I play a lot of different games. I did play a crap load of WoW even before I started working at Blizzard. And that was really my first MMO. I dabbled in EverQuest. I had played some older games. None of them really stuck. Warcraft's the first one that really got its hooks into me. I played a crap ton of it even before, like I said, working on it. But I don't play a lot of MMOs. They're a huge, as I'm sure you know, they're a huge time investment. And it's hard to play lots of MMOs at a high level. And I'm a really competitive player, so I want to see the end game. I want to be at the end game. So it's hard to play a lot of them. Let's see, other than MMOs, yeah, I'm the kind of player that's motivated a lot by, we would say mastery, getting better at something. So I like games with a relatively high skill component. I love a lot of, the Dark Souls games I've played over and over and over again because it's the kind of game that rewards experimentation and different builds. A lot of competitive games that are like just fun to play with friends. Not a lot of sports games, but other, played a lot of Team Fortress 2 back in the day, CS after that, a little less, and then I played a lot of Valorant even before it launched. Yeah, I'll play just about everything. Not a ton of mobile games yet. I know there's some out there that are pretty cool and I've kept up with. I play a lot of Switch games. I travel a lot, and the Switch is great for that.
I gotta ask you, what are your 3 favorite MMOs as a gamer?
Wow. Let me think. World of Warcraft's the easy one. After that, what would I say? And I know people are gonna analyze the crap out of any answers. I liked Star Wars Galaxies for the promise it made, which was you can do anything. You want to be a dancer, I think you could be a baker, whatever. You don't have to be a superhero. You could just be a normal person. And that real open-endedness was pretty impressive. And going even farther back than that, Ultima Online. I played every Ultima game growing up.
Right.
And that game came out. That was the first real MMO, and it just blew our minds that was you could play these games you loved multiplayer. And then you could debate whether or not it's an MMO or not, but I'm very impressed with Destiny and what Bungie has done with just kind of making high production values, pretty quick content cadence. And kind of shown that, hey, MMOs don't all have to look the same. Like it's maybe it's a looter shooter, maybe it's a something else. But I think that kind of shows you that MMOs don't have to just be. Again, I'm picking my words really carefully here. But you don't have to be a WoW clone to be an MMO. How about that?
Right, and graphically, it looks kind of insane. It really did when I played it. Yeah. As far as the work goes, though, you've been
so. As far as over analyzing his gaming background and the games he's into, what I appreciate about his list is that he tried to pick a variety instead of the 3 best expressions of one way to play. And so as I've tried to add more MMOs on the content creation side, I want to have a broader perspective of MMOs. And unfortunately, from a time investment standpoint, that can't mean just playing all of them, because to experience them, you do have to put large amounts of time into each one. And so the question is, how do I pick MMOs that for the least amount of time invested give me the broadest view of the current what people are experiencing? Now that does mean typically pick the more popular ones, because that means that you're going to have more in common with more people. The more common experiences are the ones that are being had more often. Also, picking ones you're already invested in. This is something Asmongold talked about, I think actually when reacting to Brian leaving Final Fantasy XIV, was this idea that once you get known in a game, you should start once you know a lot about a game, you should maintain that skill set. And you should maintain that knowledge base, because it's very easy to maintain an existing knowledge base versus take on a new one. And so for me, Final Fantasy and World of Warcraft are very, very, very similar games in a lot of ways. I've played a lot of both. I do play a lot of both, even though that's not adding a lot of breadth to my total MMO experience, because it's easy to maintain both. But then when you're adding new ones, what else do you add? And so as the developer of MMO, of the Riot MMO, how broad is he looking? And so when you look at Star Wars Galaxies, right, when you go look at something that's much more choose your own adventure, and then you look at something that's very, very curated, and here is our path and the current things you should be working on, like World of Warcraft, those are 2 drastically different experiences. And then when you go toss in something like Destiny, this would be tossing in any looter shooter, any action RPG. And so Canon playing a lot of Lost Ark, even something like Path of Exiles, something where you are part of a big communal thing, where communal builds, communal understandings of loot and bosses are all impactful on your gameplay. There is a continued service element of updates, either seasonally or in patch iterations or expansions, where you're all moving forward through this living document. where the same application on your computer is going to change over weeks, months, or years, or all the above. And so something like Destiny or Lost Ark, or even like a Diablo or Path of Exiles, where they're not traditionally considered that, even a Forza Horizon, something that ends up having these updates around it. Those are all like really different ways to enjoy something that we categorize as MMO.
Been working in the industry for quite a while. You worked with Blizzard before, and now you're working with Riot. Could you walk us through a little bit about your work history and how that's been for you? I am interested in the cultural difference, though.
Yeah, so I'll start with the first place I was, which is Ensemble Studios. Later became part of Microsoft, and we worked on the Age of Empires series. They also made Halo Wars. That was after I left. That company was started by a bunch of like non-gamers, almost as a spinoff from a real corporation. So it was fun in that we really had no idea what we were doing. It was very much a kind of a startup culture, except we were in an actual office in the corner of this corporation rather than a garage somewhere. My first desk was out in the hall because there was no more office space. So I just had a desk in the hall. And the desk I had was shared with like the office photocopier. And even crazier than that, so you have, when you're making games, you have bug software. Jira is one. There's a lot of different types of software. People keep the bugs there. Back then, networking wasn't as good as it is now. So the bug software was actually my computer. Like they just gave me the bug software computer and let me do my work on that. So every now and then I'd have to tab out and let someone like check their bug in and then tab back to my game, that's just what it was like back in the day. It was, I would say unprofessional, but not unprofessional in the sense they treated us badly. Right. Just that it felt more like a bunch of dudes hanging out, like, let's make a video game.
Like a budget setup, pretty much.
Yeah. The company really wanted to be a great place to work, and they focused a lot on making sure we were happy. So we had like the Pop-Tarts in the pantry and lots of soda to keep us going. And we worked a lot, partially because it was fun and we wanted to be there and like go home to your apartment when you can be in this really cool office. And then we also crunched a lot because that was part of the video game industry then, still is. Not at Riot, but I really enjoyed it there. I felt like people cared about me. I felt like I could have an impact. The thing that started to change a little bit was Microsoft. They were just getting into gaming. This was right around the time Xbox first launched, and I felt like they were having more and more of an influence on the kinds of games we would make. And I don't have a lot of bad things to say about Microsoft, but it was this giant corporation kind of coming in on top of the happy little studio we had. And at the time, there's like no way Age of Empires is going to move the Microsoft stock price, right? Like, so we not taken that seriously. It felt like we were a kind of a line item veto. So when I fell in love with World of Warcraft and played it for a couple of years, I also just kind of cold called Blizzard and said, look, I love this game. Are there any opportunities to work on it? And my timing was really good, just from luck. And if there's one message, your viewers should take away, it's like there's a lot of luck in this industry, like any industry.
Right.
My timing at Blizzard was really good because Blizzard was starting to spin up a game that they called it was called Titan, that later, through many iterations, eventually became Overwatch. But I think a lot of people know it started as an MMO. And Blizzard was going to be a 2 MMO studio with World of Warcraft and then a MMO set in modern times called Titan. So a lot of the World of Warcraft team was being pulled over to start that new project. And they really needed some backfill on World of Warcraft. And they really needed what we call systems designers, which is what I do most of the time, which is kind of the math side, the number parts of making video games. Okay. So making a class and deciding, well, this class needs a certain number of abilities, and this is what damage should look like, and this is how much you should heal, and this is how to balance a game. Like, that was something done a lot for the RTS genre. So it felt like something I could combine that with the fact that I'd played so many hundreds of hours of World of Warcraft and turn that into a job. And they were like, yes, we need some more senior designers, we need some more design managers who could run a team.
Right.
So they pretty much hired me to take over the class team on World of Warcraft.
Interesting. Wow. Can I just, if I may interject,
That is not the first person that I've heard say that they went to work at Blizzard after just basically reaching out and right through a job posting or through a contact and saying, how do I come on board? Because I'm interested. And so like when people, right, I'm primarily in the Final Fantasy XIV space. So when I see Final Fantasy XIV fans who haven't had a lot of interactions either through forum postings or going and attending panels, I'm not talking personal interactions, just the interactions that the WoW team has publicly. They don't have a lot of those. I see people say what's different about 14 is the passion, because maybe they do read Naoki Yoshida's posts on the forums or they watch live letters or something like that. And so they see those interactions and they didn't see those on the WoW side because there are less of them. They lose that sense of passion. And so like the perception does. And so they assume it's not there. But actually, like, I know a lot of people who took pay cuts to work at Blizzard because they reached out and they said, here's my qualifications and I just want to do this. And Blizzard was like, we have a position open, but you're probably overqualified. And they were like, that's fine. I just want to work on it. Like, I'm willing to take market rate for that position, or historically below market rate. But in recent history, I'm willing to take market rate for that position. And I'm in an adjacent industry or something where my market rate's a great deal higher, because different skill sets have different job postings across different industries at different pay rates. My income has varied wildly as I've jumped industries, even though a lot of times it's the same skill set, it's the same workload, it's the same mental gymnastics that I'm trying to do to achieve my tasks for the day. It's reliant on the same past experiences, the same educational backgrounds, and yet I'm paid very differently depending on the company I am providing value to. And it doesn't, like, time and time again I hear, if you want to work on that, you just work on that. And the luck thing is about preparedness meets opportunity. He's saying it's luck, but like, he was qualified to take the position when it was open. So it is random whether or not that position was open at the time he was applying for the job, but it's not random how he got the skill. So all you can do is be as prepared as you can, and then take all the shots you can, and the luck will appear when those things overlap.
Just want you to know that I prefer playing fist-based classes, and if you guys don't have that in the Riot MMO, I usually tend to go towards warrior classes. I know Asmongold as well plays warrior-based classes. Go ahead, just make us OP. Okay, just letting you know, since you're the guy.
I played a warrior a lot. I was a main tank before I went to work at Blizzard, and then at Blizzard I worked a lot on the warrior class. I said for a while I was the plate guy because I would do warrior paladin death knight. Even though I was like one of the lead designers, I still got my hands dirty with game design, which I honestly don't do anymore. This is my buddy Hudson.
He's adorable.
He's either a relatively small guy in stature, or that is the world's largest golden. My golden's a lot bigger than some of my friends' goldens, and he's not that big. Like, it's a big dog. That's a big dog. And if he's smaller in stature, that's also like an undersized iMac and a kid's dresser and a baby Roomba. I think it's just a big dog.
Adorable. I'm a huge dog guy. I know I told you that before our interview, but yeah, oh my gosh, I want to steal him if I could. I just want to.
He's on the show right now. He doesn't know there's video on that.
Yeah.
Yes, I love plate users. I didn't work on the monk class directly, but I helped the designer who did, and kind of helped set up, like, this is the vision we want for the monk. And
interesting.
Yeah, and again, when people ask what kind of classes will we have in the League MMO, the chief answer I always give, take it or leave it, is look at the kind of champions we have, and you can think.
All right, guys, that's it right there. The League MMO. That's its new name. Stop calling it the Riot MMO. That's what he referred to it as. Cannon's tossed a lot of bait out in that water, seeing what would catch. The year 4000 when it comes out, if it comes out, he's tossed a lot out there, and Ghostcrawler's let it all just fly by, matrix dodging each and every one. I'm not going to address the rate. I'm not going to address no. The League MMO. That's the first reference right there. That's what it's called.
think about
Right.
what kind of classes you might turn those into.
Can we get one class reveal drop, please?
No.
Okay, I tried. Sorry, guys, I tried.
And actually,
Okay.
you know what? Even if I did, there's a good chance it would change anyway. So that's kind of the danger
Right.
of talking about things too early.
I would say that I would bet money that you'll have at least one form of warrior class in it, though, right? Like, I mean, you know, you're talking about like Microsoft coming in and the whole corporate side. That's kind of happened to Blizzard recently, right? I think with Activision coming in. You know, I hear a lot of talk about, oh, you know, it's just not the same. The culture's not the same. Your thoughts on that, maybe?
All right, before he answers this, talking about Activision coming in, talking about in recent history. So when was this posted? 1 month ago. All right, so this was posted late 2022. I want to just talk about this. We already knew it was league-based. I know. It's just the first time. That's the more specific. Okay. So, early this year, Microsoft announced its intention to acquire Activision Blizzard, and that is going through the regulatory process to determine whether or not that is allowed to happen. Activision Blizzard King, ABK, and Microsoft have decided that they have agreed on a price and terms under which that acquisition would take place. Now it is up to consumer protection boards who don't give a crap about their competitors, but do give a crap about the consumers inside their jurisdictions, are the ones that get to say yay or nay. The current major public hurdle is the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, who is a consumer protection board inside of the United States. Is going to not just instantly approve that, they are going to take that to court because it is their stance that it is not for the consumer. They are allowed to represent consumers, not decide for consumers. So they will be representing the consumers. Of course, Microsoft, with the support of ABK, will be with Bobby and Co. will be, of course, also given a chance to say their piece in front of a judge. And then a decision will be made. The FTC can be overridden. So that's kind of the current state of that. But he is talking about the Activision culture here. And so he's going back, and Activision acquired Blizzard, and they became Activision Blizzard. And the K in ABK stands for King, the makers of Candy Crush, in 2008. Now, if I open up the MMO spreadsheet of Epic Nerdiness, we go back through World of Warcraft patches, 2008, we were in the Burning Crusade, which means that while this was happening, the Burning Crusade stuff, they were developing Wrath. They were working on the Burning Crusade. So people talk about this before ABK time in Blizzard, and I want to just really focus on how narrow that time window is. I think people associate ABK with Cataclysm or with Warlords of Draenor or with the allegations coming out of California, if it was only the Blizzard of old. And I just want to talk about just how long these companies have been tied, because anybody who's not a regular, constant, long time, debatably by the definition of the word chronic consumer of Blizzard content, ABK's been around a very, very long time. ABK came in as a publishing arm to Blizzard, and for a very long time, they left large amounts of their leadership intact. A lot of the allegations out of the state of California are people that were around. They've been around. They've been around. That's why these cut deep. It wasn't like, okay, an Activision came in 5.0 and all of the allegations were around these Activision employees and Blizzard was fine. A lot of the things that people have accredited to Activision as being the problems with Blizzard games, Blizzard was perfectly capable and successful at making mistakes in their own games. They were perfectly capable of ruining the player experience without Activision's assistance. In World of Warcraft Classic, it was not uncommon for patches to go down and then kick maintenance out over and over and over, to the point where it was not uncommon to have game time apologies issued as credits to our accounts. So, am I saying that Activision has been a perfect sister company to Blizzard? No. But am I saying that if there had never been an Activision, first of all, I do not believe financially there would be a Blizzard today. But if Blizzard was somehow given an angel investor who then got their payback and bailed and never touched anything, Blizzard was perfectly capable of making mistakes. So this kind of boogeyman thing is something that got handled when there was a Bungie separation and people believed Destiny was going to suddenly clean up its act. They got this blank check and they got to write everything was wrong with the game was the old guy. Now that the old guy's gone, I'm going to be perfect. And they have not been perfect. Life is just a little bit grayer than that. Now, we are talking to Ghostcrawler. And so let's go look up when Greg Street was the WoW director. All right, and so Greg Street, Ghostcrawler, was the lead systems designer for World of Warcraft, and he left in 2013. So it has been a minute. It has been a minute. And so I would love to know when he rose through those various positions. He has a PhD in marine science. Fascinating. He got his... There we go. He was previously 1998 to 2008. Was lead game designer for Age of Empires. So he would have come on after the Activision acquiring. So Ensemble would have been his focus. Age of Empire would have been his focus. So this would have all been after him. So as we talk about this, everything that's being asked right now from Canada Ghostcrawler, Ghostcrawler came on after the acquisition was complete, meaning this entire hoopla had already finished that they're going through with Microsoft right now. And he would have left in 2013, and 2013 would have been Mists of Pandaria. And so he would have seen it all the way from he would have overseen it from the end of Burning Crusade through to Pandaria, and would have left before people started seeing the early content of Warlords of Draenor.
I mean, I haven't been there in like 9 years now, but I still have a lot of friends at Blizzard, and it was similar to the Microsoft acquisition in that while Blizzard was crushing it, Activision stayed far away. And once that second MMO I was talking about started to struggle, meaning it was getting really expensive and taking a while, that's when Activision stepped in a little more. And they're like, hey, Blizzard, we love your games, but they are way expensive and you are very slow. And I mean, yeah, both those things are true. And I just think the way Activision tried to get Blizzard to fix those two issues probably felt a little heavy-handed, a little kind of not Blizzard-y to to players too, but I think to the team.
Okay, so how does that play out? So imagine that you are a company that ends up in a position where you either desire or need to be acquired. This is very much like you have been managing your own personal finances to the point where you are not going to be able to or do not desire to manage your own finances any longer. And so you are going to find somebody that will handle this for you, a friend, a family member, a personal advisory role or something. You're going to hire an accountant to help you manage your finances, a life coach, if you will. And so when this person comes in, as long as you're crushing it, you may just generally go to coffee with them once a week. It may not be a big deal. However, as you near a metaphorical equivalent of bankruptcy, where you are now spending all sorts of time spending money, not enough making money, you're not taking care of yourself, they are going to come in and they are going to mention that a little bit heavier every time. And so you get to the point where your spending habits way outpace your earning habits, they are going to come in and they're going to start asking questions, a lot of questions. And in Activision's case, they have a fiscal responsibility to the public shareholders to manage where money goes. Their job is to deliver a profitable company, which means the amount of things that they're spending money on need to be related to the number of things they are making money from. You can't just go spend money willy-nilly. It's the reason that people that don't go public oftentimes don't want to. Elon Musk and all of his crazy ways of running a business has said that SpaceX will never go public because no board, no public shareholder is going to let him yeet money to Mars. It's not going to happen. And he's not wrong in that way. So how do you handle that? So like as Activision stepped in, Blizzard was perfectly capable of making their own mistakes. They needed a bigger checkbook, and as Activision wrote those checks for them, they were allowed to largely do their own thing. As the years passed by, however, each time there was a change in leadership, a change in policy, Activision would ask Blizzard, hey, we loaned you money, right? The big leadership allocated a portion of the total revenue to this arm of Activision Blizzard, and that arm is not necessarily proving that they can return profit. That is not necessarily a bad thing. I think people equate that with like the loss of that, but the reason Final Fantasy XIV is successful is because it has good project management. Naoki Yoshida has said in interviews, there are other parts of Square Enix that make less money than business development, creative business unit 3 or whatever he's in charge of. And he has said in not so many words, if somebody else inside of Square Enix can make more money than I can with the resources allocated, I believe the translated quote was, I'd like to see them try. Being able to manage your resources is a good thing. It's a healthy thing. I think sometimes Activision CFO type people get villainized for coming in and saying that Blizzard needs to be profitable. But when we talk about a live service game, you want them to be profitable, because if they're not, their servers go offline. Now, you don't want them to be so profit focused that they lose the ability to make the art. But games are both an art and a business, and they have to be both. You can't just lose the art. Nobody wants that. But if you are only the art, you will not get the amount of content, the quality of content, the stable servers that you desire.
How have things been going with Riot? I mean, you guys got like Valorant, you guys got League of Legends, like everything you guys touch turns into gold. Now, is that a testament to like just the working environment and the culture of Riot, or is it just you guys just got lucky with like a few games? Like what's the deal? It can't be luck, right? I mean,
there is an element of luck to it.
Sure.
Streaming and Twitch, I think, really helped League. It just came right at the right time when streaming became a big thing, and that I think really helped to elevate League of Legends. Right. Esports was still kind of in its baby state when League came on, and now League is arguably the biggest esport in the world. I joined Riot after a trip to Asia where everyone in China and Korea were talking about League of Legends. And I was like, I played League of Legends, but I didn't realize it had become such a global phenomenon.
Right.
And
it still is, by the way.
It still is, yeah. And when I got back to the States, I'm like, I gotta look at League of Legends. I need to take it more seriously. I thought, oh, it's like that Dota clone. Like, I didn't realize it was doing so well.
Wow. Right.
I mean, it was heavily based on that formula, which was new at the time. And I think part of what Riot is really good at is looking at a game and saying, okay, there's something there that players really love, but there are also some rough edges. And I bet if we fix those rough edges, the game would become even more popular. And so, I mean, I could take no credit for it because I wasn't on League of Legends at the time, but decisions like, well, we're not going to have, turning radius, and we're not going to have denial and things like that. Dota fans were like, well, that's stupid, that, you're going to ruin the game. But it actually ended up that it made the game more fun, more approachable, more sticky, and we got a really huge audience. And then the Valorant team kind of tried to do the same thing with tactical shooters. We're already really popular. We don't claim at all that we have that genre. But we looked at it and said, like, hey, some of the ways like that players cheat with peeker's advantage and bots and stuff like that. Like, if we can fix that and we can kind of restore the competitive integrity, and instead of having the kind of like very overt military theme of Counter-Strike, let's make up our own IP. Let's do something a little crazy and have these agents with different abilities. And I love Valorant. I think it's an amazing, amazing game. I'm so proud to be part of the company that produced that. And
that was a really down-to-earth way of talking about what actually makes something successful. There is this idea that sometimes an amount of money will make it successful. And like, there have been plenty of companies that have put a lot of money into a title and it didn't take off. Anthem, and not all of them is one that immediately comes to mind. It was an immense amount of money. Halo Infinite has been an immense amount of money. One of the largest total price tags pre-release of any game ever. When you look at, I think it was like $500 million or something silly. When you look at the total price tag on what Blizzard likely spent on Heroes of the Storm and the fact that it didn't just take over the genre, it was a lot of money, and they wanted it to be the big esports thing, and you can't just buy that. On the other hand, money does go a long way. EA has done a great job securing, licensing, and monetizing very, very large licensing deals with things like FIFA. And that's been wildly profitable for them. And so, like, money is clearly a factor. Indie devs cannot match what, like, FIFA can do, but it's not the only factor. And so I think for him to sit there and pinpoint very quickly, like, if we could just fix these flaws, we'll be successful. Not if we could develop something bigger or better. It was largely just the flaws. If we can fix these flaws, we can be successful. And for that success, not necessarily to be, we can be the biggest in the space. It's something that I think the Path of Exile's director said very well, that, like, I don't have to be the biggest, right? I can scale something to what my definition of success is, and then I can just go crush that.
And you ask, like, what is the special sauce that makes that happen? It's really that above everything else, Riot places value on players. Like, we don't want to disappoint players. We want players to say, yes, those people get me. Like, they understand me. They know what kind of games I want. They know what I think is cool. They know what's hip right now. They can talk to me like a real person. And so we've always tried to really get inside the head of players, as well as, you know, we like to play games ourselves.
Right.
And that is, you know, it's exactly the reputation we wanted to get. Is we wanted every time we announced a new game for players to say, oh, I'm so excited because I trust that Riot's going to do a good job here. It was pretty unusual that we announced the MMO so early. And it was, you know, it was my boss, the CEO of the company, who said, it was his idea. Like, I didn't go rogue. He wanted to do that, and he wanted to do it for a few reasons. The first one is just to make players excited and to kind of tell them, like, okay, you don't like competitive PvP games, awesome, we'll get to you. And the second thing was, like, we know we needed to recruit a lot of people, and recruiting when you're like, hey, will you come work for this game that I can't tell you anything about, is hard. It's hard to recruit people that way.
Very true.
And then third, like, he figured, probably rightly, it would leak anyway. Like, either someone at the company or players would find out about it. And rather than trying to hide it, let's just be upfront and say, hey, we're making an MMO, it's early, we don't have a cinematic yet, we're not going to even tell you what the name is yet, but if you don't mind being a really long ride, we would love to have, you know, you all as the community, you know, take this journey with us.
That sounds so promising, and everything that you've just said is precisely the very reason why this game has so much hype, being 83 years away from releasing. It's 100%.
Wait, it was 45 a little while ago.
Oh, was it? Sorry, I'm throwing out different dates and waiting for you to be like, how did you know? You were talking a little bit about the world that we live in today being a little bit different with content creators and streamers, and it is. I mean, it's pretty crazy how big, you know, live streaming has become. How important is it to have content creators on board, not only for just the launch and promotion of the game, which is, you know, that's a given, right? Like, you want to have a big launch, but to keep them in the game? Is that a high priority? In what way do you want to keep them involved? Like, what's the deal there? Sorry if I worded that poorly. I'm jet lagged like crazy. I came back from the States yesterday, and I'm just, so I hope that made sense. Sorry.
It does. It's really important. And for a really simple reason, which is players trust streamers and influencers, because, like, I remember this industry when we would go to E3 and there would be some, like, Hollywood celebrity up on stage talking about a game, and you'd be like, you never played this game. Like, you're just reading a speech that someone told you.
Right.
But for the most part, we know that the streamers, like, they're gamers, and they're talking about a game because they love the game. And yeah, maybe sometimes you know, someone helps them out, or they get exclusive access, or get even paid or something. But I don't think a lot of streamers would stick with a game they hated for that reason.
Right.
And even when they play a game a lot, they're honest about what's working and what isn't working. And so in a really real sense, they're thought leaders. And it's if your streaming community turns on you, like, your players are going to turn on you too, because the players will feel like a sense of betrayal, or, oh, we thought they got us, but they really don't get us anymore. And the opposite is true. If you have people who are like, hey, if you listen to me, you should play this game. It's a great game. Even if you don't play the game, I'm going to talk about it a lot. And so it generates a lot of interest.
Right. Well, I'm down to play.
Awesome.
Give me a shout. So last question I want to ask you before we go into the next section, which is going to be the MMO talk. On that point, we were talking about streamers and viewership and stuff. How important is viewership on Twitch and viewership on YouTube? How important is that for you?
It is important. It's not the most important thing, right? It's not how you live or die, but it is important. It builds a lot of hype. If it's a new game, players pay attention to that. They're like, wow, why is everyone playing this game? Maybe I should check it out. By contrast, if a game starts to fall off, they're like, what is this, dead game meme or something like that? Like, I remember when Overwatch 1 launched, and for a little while, it passed League of Legends in viewership, and everyone's like, what does this mean? Is Overwatch the new thing?
Yeah.
And then for a while they were trading off, and now League is comfortably ahead again. But it does matter for that reason, is that it matters because players care about it and streamers care about it, and they watch those numbers. So
Okay, so I do want to move on here and get to our next section, and this is a section that I very much want to talk to you about. I want to just give a quick disclaimer here. Everything that we're about to talk about in this section, for those of you watching at home, these are Greg's personal thoughts and opinions on just the MMO genre, okay? This is not reflective of what's going to happen with the Riot MMO and just two guys talking MMOs, right? I want to open this up with my game. I would love to hear your thoughts on a game like Lost Ark. Number one, have you actually played Lost Ark, and to what extent?
I have played it. I have not done a ton of endgame, for starters, just because it takes a really long time to get there.
Yeah.
My team at Riot has played it a lot, because it's a team of MMO players, and honestly, Lost Ark stuck with them a lot longer than some of the other games they played. So I also just asked the team, like, hey, what would you say you really love about the game? So this is both my experience and what they said. For starters, like, I'm a combat guy. Like, it's hard for me to play a video game if the combat system is weak. I'll do it once in a while, but that's what I really enjoy. Lost Ark has great combat. Like, it has viscerality, which is kind of a fancy word, but we usually use it to mean, like, if you're a character with a giant axe and that axe hits an enemy, you feel it. Like, it's heavy.
Impact.
Yeah,
It's really hard to fix combat later. It's really, really hard to fix combat later. It's what I think Destiny does really, really well. That feeling of impact, that feeling that your actions matter, I think is really important. And it's super hard to fix it later. Yeah, changing combat later is really hard. It's really hard. It's one of the problems that WoW's had, is their combat's changed. And it hasn't changed a lot compared to Classic. When you think about people who want, like, a system to invert, like, it's still tab target, it's still abilities, it's still the same gear slots. All right.
Okay, this is not reflective of what's going to happen with the Riot MMO and just two guys talking MMOs, right? I want to open this up with my game. I would love to hear your thoughts on a game like Lost Ark. Number one, have you actually played Lost Ark, and to what extent?
I have played it. I have not done a ton of endgame, for starters, just because it takes a really long time to get there.
Yeah.
My team at Riot has played it a lot, because it's a team of MMO players, and honestly, Lost Ark stuck with them a lot longer than some of the other games they played. So I also just asked the team, like, hey, what would you say you really love about the game? So this is both my experience and what they said. For starters, like, I'm a combat guy. Like, it's hard for me to play a video game if the combat system is weak. I'll do it once in a while, but that's what I really enjoy. Lost Ark has great combat. Like it has
Does.
viscerality, which is kind of a fancy word, but we usually use it to mean like if you're a character with a giant axe and that axe hits an enemy, you feel it. Like it's heavy.
Impact.
Yeah, there's a sound effect and the enemy jumps back and responds. Like that feels, as a player, that feels awesome. And the opposite of that we might call floaty. That's where, you know, the weapon swung and I thought I hit, but there was no response, or maybe the hit animation didn't line up. Yeah, like I thought it hit, but it didn't, and now I feel kind of disappointed. Or so I think they did just an outstanding job with that. The class design is stellar. At Blizzard, we talked a lot about what is the class fantasy. You said, you know, you love to play warrior, you love to play fist characters. So when you're making any game with characters, whether it's a RPG or an MMO or not, you think about, well, what are people who play this gonna like? And just to riff on warrior for a minute, if you're playing warrior, there's probably like a lot of weapons, or even if there's not a lot of weapons, like weapons are really important. If you have something that feels like a warrior and it's casting a lot of spells, people are gonna be like, well, this isn't what I thought.
Right.
You want someone who's like, the armor matters, the experience, the skill matters. They want to feel like a soldier, a gladiator, you know. It's all about that in your face, melee, often big weapons, or at least, you know, you're very skilled with the weapons. And so and Lost Ark was great with that. They're class fantasy. The classes were interesting. You feel like you got what you were expecting, but they put in enough of a twist that it wasn't like the boring same old.
Right.
I also like, the reason I got so into WoW, the reason I've stayed with MMOs and, you know, making a career out of it now is I really love the dungeon experience. I love a group of people getting together and having a challenge. And that's honestly gotten me into trouble sometimes as a developer, because as a game developer, if you make dungeons too hard, you know, you might churn out a lot of players. And I've made that mistake before. But as a player, I love the challenge of, oh crap, how are we going to get past this? Like, given our skills, given our gear, given our class mix, what is the right solution to this problem? I love that kind of like, okay, let's get in the huddle and talk about what we're going to do to get through this next part, because it's really hard. And then the reward, you know, when like a tough boss drops and everyone's cheering and like someone gets a new weapon, like that is what I live for. Like as a player, as a designer, I love that.
Absolutely.
And Lost Ark had great and challenging dungeons that really made you feel like, hey, you're gonna have to work at this. This is not a loot pinata. You're gonna have to think. You're gonna have to be at the top of your game. You're gonna fail a lot. And for me, I know it's not everyone's thing, but for me, that is what games are about.
That's interesting you say that, because that is something that I did want to bring up, and we can kind of mix this into the same topic. One of the things that Lost Ark is known for, I would 100% agree with you, by the way, the classes and the combat, amazing. And the third kind of thing that everyone that has played the game would tell you that makes Lost Ark stand out is the raiding experience. I don't know if you saw the latest raid come out in KR. It's crazy. And the fact that the game is top down, it gives it a new experience that you can't experience in like a third person perspective, right? In NA, we just got the 3rd Legion raid, which is very difficult. Have you experienced those Legion raids? And like, what are your thoughts on that?
I've not played them again.
Okay.
You need to try a level of dedication. I have watched a lot of streams because, you know, again, I love raiding. Like it's for me, and again, not for everyone, and that I understand that.
Right.
That is the pinnacle of the game, and that's what I want to, you know, the part I want to get to, the part that I'm always excited about. And I agree with you on the camera angle. Like, part of the challenge we always had on World of Warcraft is when you make a really big boss and then you're a warrior up there fighting it, you know, you see its toe.
Yeah.
And
that's true.
You don't get to see kind of the majesty of the whole creature on screen at once without holding the camera out. I think it can also help it feel a little more like a battle scene when you can see like lots of people around and get a sense for where you are in the room, rather than it just being, oh, I'm just going to beat on this giant bag of hit points in front of me.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. On the topic of raids, I know you prefer more difficult, challenging, you know, getting that feeling of hey, we did this, hell yeah, you know. You talk about hardcore versus casual. Now, I played WildStar. I played a lot of WildStar.
Oh, WildStar was awesome.
Yeah, right? I absolutely loved WildStar, everything about it. But that game died in a hurry. And to this day, I think it's still a huge mystery. I mean, most people say, hey, it was because there's a content drought at endgame, and or the raids were just simply too difficult and they really, really catered towards the hardcores. I honestly still think that the WildStar rating, in my opinion, just the most difficult thing that I had experienced in a PvE world, personally.
Yeah. It was like a bullet hell shooter, right? The way you have to like avoid all of this stuff on the ground.
Absolutely, you know, and it was a great experience, but maybe that was the reason why it died. But then you got a game like Lost Ark where it's so successful because of how challenging the raids are. So, like, what are your thoughts on that?
It is hard to look at a game and predict, like, yeah, this game is going to crush or this game's going to die on the vine. Like, if it was that easy to do it, like, every game would be a huge hit, you know?
Right.
It's sometimes hard. I was really pulling for WildStar because
I was too.
It looked, you know, it was what I wanted in a game, and they went all in. Like, they're like, we're making an MMO. And I don't know, was it the setting was a little unusual? Was the timing not right? Had players moved on to different genres? It's hard to say.
It's really nice to make it one thing, because the idea then is, okay, now we can spend time thinking about how to solve that one thing. The idea that a game lives and dies by just one thing. It's super nice when you could say, it's just because this piece of the content, the story or the raid or the loot system or the world was good, or it's just because it came out in this one particular year and that was a big year on the following platforms or in the following genres, or it was just this one monetization decision or marketing choice. It's really, really, really nice. It tends to be a little more complicated than that. It tends to be what else was going on at the time in the world as a whole, what else was going on at the time at the world, you know, in the world of that particular genre. How well was it managed at every level? Did it have consistent content? Did it have quality content? Did it have quantity content? And was that available for all of the players that the game appealed to? If the game doesn't appeal to hardcore players and all your content's hardcore, you're in a real issue. If, on the other hand, your game appeals to casuals, but you only cater to hardcores, that's also a problem. You really need there to be something for like, if you want to run a game as a business, then if you have content that you would like to sell for money, and there are consumers looking to give you that money, you need those players to want to join in. And so it's hard. It is. It's just hard. So you could sit here and you could film this podcast with 20 different creators and 20 different devs and get and mix and match them and get 400 different reasons why an MMO is successful or fails.
What do you think killed it? If you just guess as a player.
At the end of the day, it didn't have a large enough player base, right? And so then you have to go into, well, why? Did a lot of people try it and then kind of churn out? Did it never get that, kind of critical mass of players? Because there have been, it's rare, but there have been games that were kind of sleeper hits for a while and then gradually picked up and suddenly were huge. Like Final Fantasy, their MMO, they had to do the big reboot, and now the game is more popular than ever. There's games like No Man's Sky, again, barely an MMO, if at all, but people almost rejected it. And now look at Cyberpunk also is people are like, oh, this game's bad. And now everyone's like, oh, wait, this game got really good.
Right.
So you can do it. You can launch small or even disappointing and recover. But the opposite happens a lot true. And we've seen that over and over with MMOs where players join, they go for the level up, they get to the end game, maybe they even participate in PvP or raids, and then they're like, okay, I've done it, I'm done, I'm gonna move on. And then maybe they come back, but maybe they don't, and now you've lost.
Right. So the latest raid in Lost Ark, it's a 4-man raid, but the other Legion raids are 8-man raids. Now, there are other, like Wildstar, it was like 500-man raids. I mean, obviously, I'm exaggerating, right?
I think it was 30 or 40. Yeah,
it was like 30 or 40 that all had to like really be on it, right? So when you have a game that, you know, some people want that big gaming experience where there's just a bunch of people raiding, and then some prefer to be like, hey, I'd rather just play with my 4 buddies, you know, my 3 buddies, and just we complete everything itself. What are your thoughts on that?
So
it's so interesting to see gamers from different backgrounds. I wasn't familiar with Canon before this was posted. And so interesting to see their backgrounds. When he says it's this like ridiculous number of players, and then when they go to correct the number, it's 30 or 40, as opposed to Final Fantasy releases a 24-man raid every other patch, and has had some one-off raids that were very, very large and very, very hard, with their Bozja Zadnor and Eureka content. And then in World of Warcraft, starting with 40-man raids, but having regular raids that are always 10 or more. And so 30 or 40 not feeling like an unfathomable number, being in PvP modes in these games that are very, very, very large when compared to something like Lost Ark. So it's just interesting to see either a difference in age, maybe he's younger than me, or his time with gaming is from after my time with gaming started, because we have seen a move towards more things being completable soloable, more things being completable in smaller groups. Scripe, in his interview with the lead systems designer for World of Warcraft, asked, like, are you going to make hard 5-mans, 10-mans? We've had 10-mans in the past. Are you going to move towards that, where there would be like a progression element? And that's really interesting. How do you handle that? So I think, like, it's just interesting to note that gamers have such different experiences, even within self-proclaimed MMORPG content creators. Like, he and I should, I guess, have a lot in common. But that just doesn't seem like a crazy number to me. Like 30 or 40 man for your largest scale raids doesn't seem crazy.
As a player and as a game designer, I like big raids. I just think I love the epic feeling. Like, there's no other experience like that in video games. Like, even in a battle royale, you may start with 100 people, but it's, you know, it gets whittled down really quickly.
Right.
I recognize there are problems, and I'll talk about those in a minute, but you could do so many cool things. Like, you can just kill off party members. That's really hard to do when you have 5. Like, as soon as you kill off one party member, you've lost 20% of your power, and that's hard. And you probably lost your only tank or something like that. Whereas if you have 4 tanks and you kill a couple, well, the group can keep going. And so you just have more versatility as a designer making an interesting fight. Now, I recognize some players like smaller groups. Some players want to play with their friends, and their friend group is 5 or 8, and it's not 40. When you get those really, really big raid sizes, there's almost always some dead weight, you know, and it's hard to be super brutal about, like, well, your SO is playing with us and they're not really holding up their end of the bargain, so they're out. You know, that's so I feel like the right answer is just to have a variety, have smaller group, have larger groups. You know, Destiny does that, WoW does that, Lost Ark is doing that. So that's probably the smart thing to do as a developer. But as a player, you know, I usually pick the what's the most epic.
Right. I do want to talk to you.
So that's actually the reason. That's one of the many reasons why Naoki Yoshida, Yoshi P, in charge of Final Fantasy XIV, didn't want to add hard dungeon content. Dungeons in Final Fantasy XIV are historically 4-person content. And so adding something beyond the really optional and side content deep dungeon, the roguelike tower that you climb, for 4-man was something that he really didn't want to do because it puts too much emphasis on the individual. They actually, when designing their new PvP mode, were having trouble deciding, we do want to go smaller, but we don't want it to be so small that it puts too much emphasis on the individual, because it can take the fun out of it for a lot of people, that it puts a lot of pressure that if you die, the entire group fails because of you. Their raids are done in 8-man, and by contrast, compared to 24-man, that does start to run into some of the things that Greg is saying here, where you end up with you can't do some of the crazy stuff that you can in, to leave it, Final Fantasy XIV Delibrum Savage, where you have a much larger than typical number of people solving a complex problem. You can't just kill off a tank, as he says. And so in World of Warcraft, they've had these different sizes, and Mythic Plus is a very, very different texture at 5 people mastering a piece of content over and over and over, versus Mythic with 20 people trying to beat content most impactfully on their first time through.
About monetization, but before I ask that question, what do you think separates games like WoW and Final Fantasy XIV from the others that just don't make it? Like, what is it about them? I mean, is it just the budget? Is it the creative design that's behind it? Is it the team that's running it? I mean, it could be multiple.
Okay, so Twitch chat, we talked about this on stream a little bit today. Right from the get-go, I have a big problem when we compare not making it with the top of a space. A Twitch streamer who just wants to, I think it'd be so cool to go to conventions and learn things and have that convention trip paid for by ad revenue or sponsors or whatever. Somebody inside a game's achievements, clearing all of a mythic raid during that patch, or beating an ultimate in Final Fantasy XIV to get the title in the cosmetic. Right? So the difference between the very top end person, when you were looking at the Asmongold of the MMORPG content creation space, when you were looking at the World of Warcraft of success commercial space, Josh Strafe Hayes has talked about this a number of times, that if you define success as World of Warcraft, you're not really leaving room for everybody else. If you define the chance to play and succeed and be well above the average in soccer, football, whatever you want to call it, as Lionel Messi, where you need to be the player of the year at the World Cup after being one of the greatest players of all time, and anybody below that, anybody below Michael Jordan, anybody below these people who become generational definers of something, when to be above the vast majority of people, if you were able to go be on a collegiate team at a small college that did not give you a scholarship, would mean that you were not only better than that game than 99% of human beings that will ever play it, but you also got an opportunity to travel. Maybe you got an opportunity to have discounted or even free jerseys or shoes or something assigned to it. You had a chance to play in arenas that most people don't and be down, not in the stands, but down on the field. You have had life experiences that the vast majority of people will not only not have, but not be able to relate to. And so when you start to define it as everybody below the top two in MMORPGs are not successful, imagine a company where you and a friend start an MMO, and it gets to the point that it is paying your entire bills. You have a staff that supports the game when you're on holiday. And now you retire off of the money, living in the house that was paid for, taking vacations with the money from running an MMORPG that only ended up with a couple 100,000 or maybe a couple million players. But because World of Warcraft has impacted 100 million, or by that point 200 million players, you are considered as, well, it's just too bad. It's too bad you didn't make it. So I don't mean this necessarily as a dig on canon here. It may come across that way. That's not my intention, but it's something we talked about in chat today. This, if you aren't the person who is in the 8-man raid group clearing an ultimate on stream where there's 7 of the most well-known, talented Final Fantasy players carrying this one individual to success, if you're not carried like that, then you're not somebody who gets the clear. Isn't being the top 1% incredible? Not top 1, not top 2, top 1%. World of Warcraft, we're talking about over 100 million players. If you could be in the top million players to experiencing something, clearing an entire mythic tier while it is relevant is probably only 500,000 players worldwide, but 500,000 is a lot more than the number of people who got to be in a world first guild. So when we define it as, well, if you're not in one of the 2 world first guilds, it's a real bummer that you didn't get to experience mythic. We have got to loosen it up to at least the top 1%, the top 2%. Heaven forbid your top half. Oh yeah, out of 100 million people that played World of Warcraft, I only ever got to experience something that was more than the first 50 million. Well, that's a real bummer you didn't get to enjoy the game. That's a real bummer that they locked so much away from you. Come on, guys.
Things. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think you're right that budget is part of it. Like, again, thinking of raiding, it's a spectacle. And in Final Fantasy, when a boss comes down and like maybe the guitar kicks in or something, like they don't mind making like custom music for boss fights and stuff like that. Like it is something amazing to see. And you can make a really, really fun encounter that's pretty much just like a big ogre dude hitting you, but it's just not the same epic scale. It's not the sense of like, this is something So yeah, budget's part of it. I also think the bigger games, and maybe the ones with the bigger budget, are just better at serving a broader audience. So say you make an MMO and you're like, hey, this MMO is PvP only because we think we can just make a better game if it's PvP. Well, you could probably guess there are going to be players that are like, well, I'm out. That's not me. Final Fantasy has a great like crafting game. It has a great social game. It lets you decorate your houses. So it serves players a lot of really different motivations.
Right. I don't know if you can answer.
That was the answer. What do the big games have that the little games don't? The big games appeal to a big amount of people. New World has 50,000 concurrent players or more when they drop content. They drop content regularly at no additional cost after the purchase price to their non-subscription MMO that regularly goes for as little as $20, but max MSRP is $40 to get into. Well, it's only 50,000 people. It's a real bummer. It's such a failure. What? What? They built a game that appealed to a certain type of gamer, and that certain type of gamer is having fun. That should be defined as success. That's success. And they don't have the marketing engine to market them to as many people. They also don't have the hunger for as big of a budget. They don't need as much money coming in. So, like, a game may not be as big and it can still be really meaningful. The people that play EVE Online love it, but it's not the two games he named. And debatably, by extension, it's the same with Lost Ark. Lost Ark still has a very large interest right now, but a lot of what drives current interest is current content. And the Western audience is spoiled in that they are getting content spun up by the past. So they are getting content released at a faster than sustainable rate. It's like WoW Classic. There's a lot of people asking, hey, you're burning fuel up a lot faster than it's entering the tank. What are you going to do when the tank hits empty? People don't really have a good answer. Now, New World in particular is backed by Amazon, so maybe they don't have to run it at a profit. But Embers Adrift is not. And people that are playing Embers Adrift and are having fun, that's great. Ashes of Creation does not have the backing of a big publisher at this point, and if it releases and is not as popular as World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV, that's okay. Guild Wars 2 is not a failure of a game, and ArenaNet does not have the resources of Square Enix, Activision Blizzard, or Amazon. None of them. Now start focusing on indie games. Success should not be determined by are you on the podium. The gap between Final Fantasy and the third place is enormous because of how these games are sorted. But it's not a failure. If you're the 10th largest MMO, you probably have a number so small compared to WoW that I guess in this definition it would be considered a failure. But Ghostcrawler hit it right. He said they don't have as broad of an appeal. That doesn't mean they're worse. He didn't say they were worse.
To this, but do you feel comfortable with the budget that you have for the Riot MMO?
Oh, that's actually a really interesting question. I think I can answer it. One of the nice things about Riot is we're not going to run out of money, right? I'm not going to have a publisher that's like, hey, if you got to ship by Christmas or we're canceled. Riot will cancel this game if the game isn't good enough. They're not going to cancel the game because it gets too expensive. And those go hand in hand. We could make a very expensive bad game and then I would get fired. Right. We could make a less expensive game that still really captures hearts and minds, but it's not a blank check, right? Like I have to prove, and the team has to prove that whatever Riot is putting into it is worth it. Because they could spend the money somewhere else. They could make a different game. They could double down on Valorant or something. So it's definitely not a blank check, but it's also not like we're not a startup where, oh gosh, we're out of money. What are we going to do? I can always go back and ask for more. Whether or not I get more is going to depend a lot on what they think how does the game look? What do playtesters say? how are we doing, about hitting our milestones? So that is how, in the very simplest sense, you can think of it as you get some money. If you spend it well, they're going to give you more. If you don't spend it well, you're probably done. And in our case, rather than shipping the bad game, it would just get shit canned.
That's awesome. That distinction, I think, is massive, not only from your perspective, but especially from the consumer's perspective. Like, just knowing that, hey, this MMO that's coming out, money isn't the issue. They'll cancel it if it's not good. I would have a lot of respect for a company that, would cancel a game because of that, rather than the actual money that's going into it. That's really, yeah.
I would love to see the numbers. I don't think anybody reveals them. The numbers on how many games get canceled. It has been quoted by some of the leaders of Blizzard over the years that Blizzard has canceled more games than they've released. And I would love to know if that is an industry standard or if that is an industry outlier. I don't actually know the answer. So I think that would be really intriguing to kind of know whether or not that's something that's pretty typical. I don't know. So Demon in chat says on average 50% of games get canceled industry-wide. And when you do it from any of the large publishers, EA, Activision, Square Enix, Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, Tencent, none of them did it because they ran out of money. They all did it because they didn't think the project was going to be successful. You can have your own interpretation of those companies, whether or not you think it's a quality game, but they all believe that a product needs to be good enough to make money. And so if it's not good enough to make money, they're not going to move forward. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I completely agree. The disappointment from players, and I understand there'd be disappointment. I'd be disappointed. But that's coming from, I had such high hopes for this game, and I'm disappointed that it didn't get there. And they don't want a bad game. They don't want us to ship the game no matter what. They want a good game, and that's
absolutely.
If we can't deliver a good game, what are we doing?
So one of the things that the game does need to do is it needs to generate revenue. Okay, so I'd love to get your thoughts on a sub-based model versus a free-to-play model.
The truth is they're both viable. What you generally get in a sub-based model is fewer players, because fewer players can afford it, but are a very steady revenue stream. So you might say, I would rather 1 million players who pay me $15 a month regularly than 5 million players who sometimes pay and sometimes don't. That's just, that's just the economics of it. So generally, if you want to go free to play, it's because you think you can have a lot of players and you'll be okay even if they don't individually spend a lot of money. You'll have a lot of players who spend nothing. You'll have some players who spend more, but on average, you're assuming they're not going to pay that much, and you make up for it with size. And you see that in a lot of mobile games, not just mobile MMOs, but mobile games in general. Assume that they don't have very long a lifespan, so they need to make money right away. Big audience right away, because then people are gonna drop them and move on to the next thing. It's also interesting that in China, a little less so Korea, but still more so I think than in the West, the notion of pay for power is not as, it's almost repulsive to a lot of Western players, because they're like, it comes to them as like, well, that's not fair. Like, why should that person have better gear than me when they just spent money on it?
Right.
But at least to a Chinese mindset, sometimes they're thinking, well, I don't want to spend a lot of time grinding to get this item. Why can't I just pay you to get it right away and get to the good stuff? Maybe I just want to raid. Let me skip to the good stuff. Particularly, this was more true in both Korea and China when a lot of gamers had to play it at PC bongs or PC cafes, because then they're literally paying for the hour.
Right.
So rather than paying per hour to get 100 hours to get a sword, let me just buy the sword and skip all that stuff. So we're not going to do pay to win. We're not going to do pay to power. I'm pretty confident saying that. The business
that's a big one.
I probably said that, or a lot of players assume that. It's just not Riot's style.
Right.
We really want players to feel like they're welcome back in the game at any time. And if life is rough right now and you're between jobs, or you just can't, you can't pay for the subscription, I'd rather them not churn out rather than be able to keep playing. So that's why Riot has traditionally liked free to play with purely cosmetic purchases. But again,
is that enough though? because an MMO, again, I'm very ignorant to the game development and the budget side of things when it comes to MMO, but I would imagine that it's very expensive to maintain and run and create an MMORPG. Is it feasible?
It's probably the most expensive kind of game to make.
Right? I would think so.
Only other thing close is like huge open world,
Right.
Horizon Zero Dawn, Assassin's Creed, Red Dead Redemption style. Those are also very expensive, but an MMO needs everything. It needs matchmaking. It needs a chat system. It needs, a gear system. It just, every system you can imagine. So yeah, they're very expensive to build. And if it's a super content heavy game, they're also very expensive to run.
Absolutely.
If it's a more PvP based game or a more sandbox game, it's less expensive to run because players are providing a lot of the content.
Right, absolutely. Is it feasible for a large scale MMO, like a big budget MMO, to sustain with a free to play model that just monetizes off of cosmetics? Honestly, because like for me, I'm thinking like, no. For me, technically, theoretically, yes. Obviously, if everyone is buying these costumes and stuff, sure. I know for a fact it would be. But like realistically, I feel like the answer to that is no. What would you say?
No, we've done the math, and I think there is a world that works out. Like,
really,
you can have enough players who are willing to pay enough on cosmetics to fund a really big game.
Really, like how often would you expect, in order for that to work, how often would you expect to have to like release new cosmetics? Because obviously you can't release one new cosmetic a year to be able to, right? Like no one's gonna buy, right? That's not enough money.
And I also know from experience that players resent when they feel like you're spending too much development effort on cosmetics. Like, to look at League of Legends, for example, if we stopped making champions and just kept making skins, at some point players are like, well, this kind of sucks. You're only focused on the money-making side of the game. So you need to do both. You need to make sure the game balance is good. You need to update everything that you can in order for players to feel good about it. So, again, we don't even know for sure exactly what our business model is going to be, but done the math enough to convince myself that if we said, can you launch a game with just cosmetics? Probably you can.
Okay, so obviously you just stated, as far as the Riot MMO goes, there's no confirmation, there's none of that. But for you personally, what do you, as a gamer, what do you personally prefer? Do you personally prefer to play a sub-to-play game or a free-to-play game that has an in-game feature?
The one thing that bothers me about a sub is kind of the guilt of, I'm paying for this game and I'm not playing it right now. And so for a game like World of Warcraft, I came back and played the last expansion. And then when I stopped playing, I felt like, well, the right thing to do is to cancel my subscription.
Right.
But then if I want to jump in and play one night, well, am I going to start my subscription up again? Like, there's a little bit of friction there to really fitting in how I play. Whereas, like, if I want to play Valorant, I'll just pick up Valorant. If I want to put Valorant down for 6 months and pick it up again, great, I'll do that. Now, there are battle passes and things like that can be subscription-like. But overall, I think that's the one flaw in the subscription model is, as a player, you feel like the right thing to do is to turn it on and off all the time.
Right.
Kind of a habit.
Right. What do you think about the games that are free to play but have like a subscription option where you get bonus stuff like extra loot drop percentage,
So he's jumping pay model to pay model and kind of asking Ghostcrawler's thoughts, because Ghostcrawler's not ready to talk about what the plan will be for the upcoming Riot MMO, right? The League of Legends MMO. Because that's what he called it. He called it the League MMO. So I prefer to call it that than the Riot MMO, because as long as we have a working title, I'd rather call it the working title, right? Like a lot of times, Final Fantasy XIV was Project Rapture. Overwatch was originally Project Titan. Like, I would rather call it the working title that they call it internally than come up with our own. And so, like, I understand Riot's the publisher, but, as he's noted, they're associated with a lot of titles and a lot of genres. So, the League MMO. So I'll try to be better about it now that I've heard him say it. So when he talks about all these different monetizations, there is no one solution. There is no one perfect model. It's always going to be, what do you get? What do you lose? And the big generalized, like, academic questions, is it theoretically possible to release a free game that is cosmetics only and make money be profitable. Yes, it is theoretically possible. Does it actually happen? I cannot think of any real world example. It doesn't mean there's not one out there. Because for it to be successful, if it is thrilling its community, gaining new players at or above the rate it is losing old players, and it is paying the devs what they want to make to pay their salaries and grow the studio and pay for an office if they want one and all those things, it doesn't really matter, right? Like if it's a couple of devs and they've got a couple thousand players and that's enough for them, that's enough for them. So like as an academic question, any of these pay models work in theory. That's why there isn't just one pay model on the market, because there's not one solution. There's not one perfect way to play. There's different things for different people. I personally prefer subscription-based models because while Ghostcrawler did a good job of talking about some of the weaknesses, some of the strengths are that I know the developer knows I can unsubscribe and knows that it's hard to get me to resubscribe. It's not simply an answer of I want to play or I don't want to play, that there is friction. And that friction means that the number of active players tells you something. It's not just I thought about playing so I played. It's very much this was more than a passing thought. They made an intentional choice to install, activate their sub and play, and they made an intentional choice to uninstall and unsubscribe. And both of those, that friction tells them that they have to release something awesome to get you over the friction line, and they have to make more than one mistake to get you under that friction line. That an average consumer will not hop in for an average amount of appeal, and an average consumer isn't going to bail on you for an average amount of mistakes. You're going to come and go a little bit more slowly in a subscription model than a free-to-play game, especially with minor downloads. If you had like a browser-based game, something that takes 2 seconds to hop into, out and in you go. So I prefer subscription-based. I prefer it because it also tells me that there will be constant updated content, because that's what gets me to stick around and be a constantly paying member. And I like constantly updated content. So I prefer that sub model. I also prefer to know what the price is before I walk in somewhere. Same with restaurants. It does not bother me that there are expensive restaurants in the world. It does not bother me that there are cheap restaurants in the world. What I don't like is market priced restaurants. I don't see the price of lobster going up and down so much day over day versus the price of beef being a reasonable transaction for why you can tell me that a steak and hamburger, depending on the cut and preparation, can be anywhere from $1 to $100, but you can't ballpark me a crustacean. I don't like market price. And I don't really appreciate it, because you are telling me you're going to come describe something. I'm going to say it sounds amazing. And then I have to order something and guess, or I have to ask for the price, which in the culture I grew up in is unpolite. And so sitting in front of my in-laws saying I'm taking them out for dinner, my wife and I are going to pay, and then them saying the lobster and me going, and how much does that cost, is considered impolite. And so it feels like they're messing with me. As opposed to I could have seen the price and made a decision in my own head, in the privacy of my own head, where I knew roughly what we had to spend and I got to make that choice. So I don't really like the free-to-play games as much. That doesn't mean I've never played them. Doesn't mean I've never had fun in them. So it's not to say that the caliber of the game is bad. That's simply with the pay model. And so that's going to vary so much person over person. I think Ghostcrawler did a really good job of not necessarily answering what his preferred model is, because that would start to get seen as he's going to put his vision onto the League MMO. And that's just not necessarily true, right? He's going to look at a lot more than just that. Who does it appeal to? How many people do they have to appeal to be profitable? And where do the pay models lie? Within the different markets and things like that. He self-labeled himself early on in this interview as an American game developer. But then he talked about different markets of players. And so he thinks of that as very geographic driven, as opposed to Yoshi P, in charge of Final Fantasy XIV, calls himself a global developer with a global audience. And so that means when they're discussing pay model, that sounds like the League MMO would be willing to consider different pay models for different markets, as opposed to it seems like Yoshi P would be largely resistant to that idea, because he wants to have a global solution for all players. And it's just a different mentality. Are you part of a global community where you are going to have to live with choices that are made based on how they play out in other regions, but you are going to gain things that come out of other regions? Or are you going to be treated more bespokely and with all the good and bad that comes with?
Extra experience, you know, a lot of games do that. Like BDO does it, even Lost Ark does it to a certain extent. What do you think about that model?
I think as a player, I think that's pretty cool because it gives you the option to kind of pay how you want. If you're like, hey, I'm not ready to commit money to this game, awesome. But if you're like, no, I'm in, I know I'm going to spend lots and lots of hours in this game, I don't mind, you know, spending a little more for a better experience. I think that's pretty cool. It is, you know, again, like I said before, with the pay for power, it's a slippery slope, and you can easily turn off players
right.
if you're too heavy-handed with that.
Right. Now, I have always personally preferred sandbox games until I...
All right, before he moves on to Sandbox, on the optional subscription, is it optional? To anybody that sticks around in the way that Greg talked about it, I'm in, I know I'm going to put a lot of hours in this game. It's not really optional. When you talk to ESO players, when you talk to BDO players, when you talk to Lost Ark players, anybody who's going to stick around these games for a very long time, they are not monetization optional. Anybody who's going to stick around Guild Wars for a very long time, they give you the living seasons for free, but there are a lot of quality of life items that go well beyond cosmetic that long term you're going to want to pick up at least some inventory modifiers, maybe some gathering tools or salvage tools or something like that. Depending on the aspect of the game you play, you might want different build slots or something for PvP. Depending on the element of the game you play, there are going to be some optional costs that are going to feel less and less optional the more you stick around. So the way he phrased it, I actually agree with. If you know, letting people decide at their own pace when they're in, as his phrasing was, I think is very, very fair. And then knowing that once they are in, once they're ready to invest, that optional sub is no longer going to feel optional. That you are saying, we are a subscription game. I'm going to let you go as far as you want to go, as far as answering your own questions. I'll let you play in all the modes. I'll let you play all the classes or whatever. I'll let you dabble in all the systems. You're going to have an inferior experience because you are not a contributing member to the financial success of this game. However, if you are ready to consume large amounts of our content long-term to invest in your character, this community, and this game, a game where now at this point you are saying, I know that I would like this game to still have servers online in a month, 2 months, 6 months, a year. I know that I would like my character to be something I check back in with more than I am today, that I'd like to come back tomorrow, the next day. If I take some time off, I don't think I'm done with this game forever. That at that point, that subscription is part of the transaction. I think is a very fair way. I think where people feel baited is when the company then markets that game as, it's optional. It's optional. You can play this game for free and achieve all the same things. And then you find out it's 5,000 hours to get to that mount, or one $5 transaction. You're like, 5,000 hours to $5. That's insane. But when you say, no, the sub was never designed to be optional. I wanted you to try it, and as soon as you were ready to commit, yes, at that point, we did design the sub to grant you the complete experience.
I start playing Lost Ark, and maybe it comes with age too, but I'm starting to enjoy these theme park games. But sandbox games have always been very fun for me because of the entertainment that comes with player-driven content. That and the fact that I'm a big PvP guy. Lost Ark is a PvE game. Lost Ark really has turned me on to the PvE side. However, you know, the player-driven content versus design content, what are your thoughts and opinions and preferences for that?
I mean, as a player, I play both kinds.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different experience. I think the theme park sometimes gets derided as being, I don't know, old-fashioned or boring. But some of those best experiences, like I was talking about, when a boss in Final Fantasy drops and the music changes, like that's a theme park and it's epic, and I love it. You know, I'm there for it. I think that's that's great. The novelty part, and novelty is kind of a funny word, but we think about it as when I talk to my friends the next day, what am I going to say? And maybe I'll say like, hey, did you see that episode of Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon or whatever last night? Did you see when that boss dropped? That was so epic. But that's very fleeting because the moment's kind of there and gone.
Right.
In a PvP game, those stories can kind of go on forever because it's, hey, you'll never guess what happened. I was in this game last night and I thought we are going to lose, and then this guy showed up and this crazy thing happened. And the stories are really about the other players. And you frame it in terms of the game, but the stories are not, the developers wanted me to experience this XYZ, so that's what I experienced.
Right.
So that's why I have a slight preference towards more novelty as a player, and the way you get that is often other players. And PvP is the most glaring example of that because you need a lot less content in a PvP game. Like League of Legends doesn't have a story. It doesn't have a campaign. It doesn't need it. The story is you and your team went up against this other team.
Quick question on that note. Classic WoW is very different from retail WoW, right? Obviously. If you had to choose, do you prefer the classic WoW experience or the retail WoW experience? Not like the nostalgia. Classic WoW is a lot more sandboxy compared to retail WoW, comparatively speaking, right? Like which of the two do you personally prefer?
No, I agree with that. My criticism of, I don't want to bash on Blizzard. I love Blizzard. I have a lot of friends there. My criticism of the Shadowlands expansion I came back for was a lot of it felt like I was playing a single player game in a chat window. Like I was still chatting with my friends, but we weren't doing stuff together. The campaign is mostly a single player experience, and having your friends play it with you is often kind of challenging because you're in different parts of the story or whatever. The dungeons and raiding were wonderful in Shadowlands, and I really enjoyed that. And again, that's like why I play the game, but it has much more of that. It's not quite a sandbox, but it is a little bit in how you approach the different bosses. It's like, oh, we need someone to sheep this boss. We don't have a mage. What are we going to do? How are we going to solve this?
Right.
That kind of thing. That's really, again, that problem solving is really fun for me. So you get some of that novelty back in challenging content.
Gotcha. So factions.
So he leveraged some criticism at Shadowlands that was very, very fair. And without going back and rewriting too much history, without going back and changing the number of patches, or the way any one particular feature of Shadowlands was built. Just implement it largely the same way. How could you have fixed what Greg is calling for there without removing it? You're not deleting anything. You're not spinning up a bunch of dev time that didn't exist. You're not adding patches. A lot of what he hit on there was actually, when is content mandatory? Because in Shadowlands, that campaign that he said wasn't really for him because it was solo. Maybe he saw value in it, but when he wanted to progress his account, he ended up in a chat window chatting with his friends that were online at a time that he wanted to play with his friends, and he felt like instead their best outcome was if they both went and did their own thing separate from each other. A lot of that is because of what is mandatory. You want players to try everything you put in game. You took a ton of development time and effort and energy to make content in a game. And so you want them to try it. You don't want people leaving your buffet going, well, I had the 3 items on the leftmost little basket there. I had some of the chicken and some of the salad there, and ultimately I really wasn't satisfied. I wish they had some beef. I wish they had maybe a dessert bar. And you're like, I had beef. I had a dessert bar. It was over there. And so you want people to go and sample your content because you just want them to be aware, like, hey, there might be something that you weren't aware of existed or you didn't try, and you would end up really enjoying. And so you want people to go try that thing. But when it is more than, hey, come over here and just acknowledge that you saw this, and it starts to become, or hey, come over here, there's something cool happening over here, so if you're interested, it's over here. And it starts to be, you need to come over here and you need to eat all this beef. And you're like, well, I don't really like beef. I'm here for chicken. No. You need to eat every last bite. That's really frustrating. And so when you compare Classic versus WoW in his response, not necessarily in the way I would compare Classic and retail, or maybe the way you would compare Classic and retail, in his response, the biggest difference there was the lack of ability to play with his friends and the lack of ability to choose portions of the game where problem solving was made a primary component. And so the ability to run dungeons where you needed to think, as he put it, hey, we don't have a mage, so we don't have polymorph, so we're going to need to do this differently than if we did have a mage that would be able to turn one of those mobs into a sheep so that we could ignore it. And Shadowlands had those things. So without spending unlimited Shadowlands dollars, I'm telling you that, like, Torghast, if it was not made into Choreghast, could have been a problem-solving thing. Running the mall with friends at your convenience could have been that thing. These elements did exist. Mythic Plus was present, and for many of what it did in its last season was rejoiced even. These things did exist. However, they were gated behind all of these things that were not done in that way, or the way the way Torghast was implemented, there was very much this, you need to do exactly this amount, and then you need to move on to the next thing that's also required. And so if you already finished your Maw for the day, and now you're working on your Covenant dailies, and your friend hops into the Discord call or whatever, and goes, oh, I forgot to boot up Discord, I just did my Covenant dailies, and now I'm headed into the Maw, you guys just aren't going to play together that day. Even though you're doing the exact same things, and they could have been done as a pair. So I think a lot of what he talked about was the way it was structured. So it's not a wild thing to say that if this exact conversation happens at the end of Dragonflight, and Cannon gets the opportunity to sit down with Greg again and say, hey, Ghostcrawler, what do you think of Dragonflight versus Classic? It might be a different set of pros and cons. Because his frustration there is entirely geared at how the content is structured in both games, not actually a statement on the amount or the quality or the way it's paced or anything like the rewards. None of the things that would require real substantial dev effort to, like, rebuild something.
Are another big thing with MMOs. You have games like WoW where it's
challenging content.
Gotcha. So factions are another big thing with MMOs. You have games like WoW where it's literally faction versus faction. Ion did it as well with a third faction. What are your thoughts and preferences when it comes to faction versus no faction?
I mean, again, there are strengths and weaknesses of both approach, and
Absolutely.
I don't think you could just say there's a right and the wrong. Like, what you get out of factions is a great story because you know who the bad guy is, you know who the enemy is. Like, I hate those guys, let's go kill them.
Right.
That is baked right in, and it's awesome. And that, just like with any sport, you root for your team. You get that sense of tribality, I guess. So that is what factions get you. What they miss is, say you and I want to play a new MMO together, and you're like, oh, I picked these guys. I'm like, well, shit, I picked the other guys. I guess we'll never play together because now we're in different factions. Like, that's the big downside, and it's hard to get around it without watering down the story that brought you there in the first place.
Right. Do you have a personal preference if you had to choose? Like, if you're going to play a game?
I play games. Maybe a lot of people play games this way. I kind of play games with my friend group, so a faction doesn't really hurt us that much because we'll talk ahead of time about, hey, what are we going to do? Even like my WoW guild, they're like, hey, are we going to be Horde or Alliance this expansion? And that discussion happened. So factions don't have that flaw for me that they might for some.
Moving on, progression. Now this is...
Okay, so he plays with a specific friend group. So he's talking about his own personal experience. Factions are something that's present in New World. It was looking like it was going to be a lot more impactful than what it's ending up. The game seemed like it was going to be PvP focused, ended up being PvP emphasized. It looked like it was going to be faction driven, and instead it looks like it's going to be faction emphasized. And so when you see these games saying that they're going to be this really pure thing, World of Warcraft has stripped back a lot of that. I have alliance characters this time around, and I can mail things back and forth. I can party with my friends. I'm in parties with my friends sometimes, which are great, and we're doing things. We're working on world stuff together. And so that element, and I used to play on PvP servers, and now that's war mode. So you see that kind of stripped back. Final Fantasy XIV, you used to have to choose a grand company, and for their PvP-based mode, where it was each of the grand companies against each other, you could not party with your friends that were in the wrong grand company. And that is something that went away over time. Where I think factions are very, very cool is that you get a chance to align yourself with something. That tribalism that Greg mentioned there, that element of, I know who I'm rooting for. I think this can be present in racials. When you look at video games, right? When you look out at the world, that becomes really awful really fast. But when you look in video games, you're not talking about the amount of melanin in someone's skin or something like that, or something that was outside of somebody's control. You're talking about a character creation screen that they can go back to in many cases and change later. And you're talking about races like gnomes versus orcs. And so there's this drastic difference there where they can have these wildly different, very stereotyped personalities where they all have similar voice profiles. They're raised in one specific land. Maybe they're all technology focused versus another one is all about the divinity of the Earth Mother or whatever. And so you can have some of that present in racials. You can have some of that present in various class design. So when you have class, order, roles, whatever you want to call them, where all of the tanks are aligned with each other and all the healers are a different alignment. And so you can see those rivalries take place. So you don't necessarily give it up per se when you move to a non-faction based game. You can have warlocks be against mages and mess with each other on who did the highest DPS or whatever that thing is. That's totally fine. That's present in games. So I think the rivalry takes place with or without. It's just very tactile. Like, it's very real when there's a literal person you can't party with. And in a modern day and age, when we have cross-platform, cross-save, especially with games that are older than 10 years old, should you design a game and be lucky enough to be the kind of game that through a series of your own choices and market conditions, you end up still being around 10 years later, you run the risk of somebody who does play with their friend group, like Ghostcrawler just said, but they end up meeting another friend. So he's playing with Cannon, he's talking with Cannoneer, and he goes, it'd be really fun to run a dungeon together tonight. Oh, I picked Horde because my friend group is Horde and your Alliance. And so I don't think there's a need to divide player bases anymore. As we move to where cross-platform, cross-save is the standard within the MMORPG space for all large AAA titles because they have the dev resources to make that possible. I don't see any reason to make factions a hard line in the sand. If you want to have these optional things where you can like align with a covenant, as it were, or a group, and then you can cheer for them in the final scene and all of that. But I think that largely needs to be a cosmetic choice. And at a mechanical level needs to be something that if there is a forced choice, I don't mind agency, that it is a reversible choice, or that it does not get in the way of those sandbox elements, that chance to take part in a community. You're part of a Discord or a Reddit, or you watch a streamer, or you hang out in a YouTube channel, and they all agree to meet somewhere on a specific day, and you're not welcome. That's a real bummer. And so having cross-server, cross-region, if at all possible, ability to go attend some group. If your favorite content creator is about to enter a particular piece of content and you guys all meet there and you're all dressed in a certain way, jumping around, partying, that's a really neat thing. And to lock that away simply because you made the mistake of playing where your friends are the 99.9% of hours you play the game is real dumb. So in a modern day and age, I personally would like to see that fade. At a technical, like, what does the game mechanically force do? If we want to have cosmetic fun rivalry, like for the Horde and Alliance sucks, that's really fun. When I play Warhammer 40k, I talk a lot of trash about how the Imperium are the worst. And why Josh Strife Hayes is unfortunately just a very bad Warhammer player because he picked really poorly. And why I recently learned in a newlywed game over the holidays that my wife believes that my man crush is Henry Cavill. And unfortunately, and she's like, well, he plays Warhammer. And I was like, yeah, but he plays the wrong Warhammer. And so like that I can have those things and poke fun at that while still rejoicing that we could play the same game together. And that if I was ever in the UK and had a chance to play a game with either one of them, that would be an amazing experience. But ultimately, like, the rivalry is only at a surface level. It doesn't really matter. That's where I think it needs to stop. Effectively cosmetic only. Narrative only. Sandbox only. If you want to have all Horde players on one side and all Alliance players on another in a custom game, that's fine. But if I'm just looking for the next match to form, just put me in a match. If I want to play a match with somebody that I met on the bus, let me play with them and stop being like, well, because you made a choice 10 years ago on your character. No.
This is is a big one for me. And Lost Ark, in my opinion, one of the
For some.
moving on, progression. Now, this is a big one for me. And Lost Ark, in my opinion, one of the biggest downsides to Lost Ark is the daily grind. And they call it homework. Like, literally, that's the term we use. We call it homework. Those start adding up. And it's a very alt-focused game, which is another thing that I want to talk to you about after this. But it's a grind. Nobody likes it. Right? Nobody likes doing it, in the West at least. But at the same time, how do you make a game, an MMO, not repetitive? You do need to give tasks for players to do every day, to log into the game and feel that progression, so that when they do get progress, they feel rewarded, right? There needs to be that grind to a certain degree. I would love to hear your thoughts on MMORPG progression, and let's start with that, dailies and the day-to-day content. Your thoughts?
So MMOs, RPGs, I think in general need progression. I know there are people out there that say, oh, you could have a very flat game and it'll work. I think, I like to get more powerful. I like to get new weapons and spells or whatever. So I think progression is important. It is a very delicate tuning point, because if players progress too quickly, they kind of run out of stuff to do. They're like, okay, I'm done. And if they progress too slowly, it's frustrating. It's like, you play for 1,000 hours and you get, 5 more hit points. Like that feels pretty crap.
It's terrible.
So the tuning is really important, and you want to make sure that you can progress at a rate that you feel without running out of stuff to do too quickly. So dailies, wow, I remember. So in World of Warcraft, we added more dailies because players said, hey, I have nothing to do. I like raiding. I raid with my guild once or twice a week. What am I supposed to do the rest of the time? Originally, it was, go farm flasks and other types of consumables. And over time, that changed to...
Cannon said that players don't like dailies, but when they added dailies to WoW, it was rejoiced, and we were capped at 10 per day. And when the number of dailies available became very large, players that were new or were going back and they were binging it after a raid tier instead of trickle feeding it, realized that they couldn't work on all the dailies simultaneously because it was more than 10. So they asked for it to be raised. So in Mists of Pandaria, it was raised to 25. And then, once again, players who wanted to grind all that said 25, why cap it? So they lifted the cap. This is player feedback. People can say that people do not want these things, but they do. The gates, like daily and weekly lockouts, are to stop, players consuming to the point that they've, eaten all the meat off of the crop, like a bunch of locusts, and then they disappear. Because as you noted earlier, with a subscription-based model, you want that consistent revenue. You also don't want players that are burned out and tired of your game. I saw this with Dragonflight, where people were like, you know what I hated about it? Was that they made me farm rare mobs for 11 hours on Saturday. Nobody made you do that. At no point for anybody in the bottom 99.5% of players in World of Warcraft was required to farm rare mobs at the beginning of Dragonflight. That was not a mandatory step. It was utterly optional. If you want to progress from normals to heroics to mythic plus dungeons, you did not need a single piece of loot off of rares, much less to grind them for 11 hours. That was not mandatory. That is a real complaint that I saw. Nobody made you do that but you. So players are perfectly capable of burning themselves out, and the dev needs to, as best as possible, act like the parent in the room that says, you cannot have ice cream for dinner because I know you're going to complain about a stomachache tomorrow. In addition to that, you also want content to be something that's consumed steadily by your entire player base. You don't want all the hardcores to get so far ahead that they won't even run with the casuals, and the casuals get left behind and feel like it's not even rewarding because they can't catch up. So you want that gap. You want there to be a healthy consumption rate that can be enjoyed by a wide variety of player hours and player efficiency. And so you want those daily and weekly grinds. However, we are moving into an era where the technology on that doesn't mean that it has to be every day. This daily capture thing, if somebody wants to take Saturdays off, one of my biggest complaints about my Apple Watch is that the daily exercise thing wants the same amount of daily exercise minutes from you 7 days a week. And that's not how fitness works. You can have and should have rest days. You can have days where work is just too long and you don't have time to work out. So it ruins your streak that it's like, try to do 7 days in a row. But because you can't do that, I end up not engaging with it at all. So when you have a game that's become so daily focused that it punishes you for making the mistake of, oh, I played this other game on Thursdays, or I accidentally got food poisoning this week. That was a real stupid thing of me. Like, punishing players for not being able to keep a daily streak is moronic. And it's something that is heavily seen in games that are wildly focused on dopamine hits, where they can't afford you to come out of your dopamine haze long enough to look up and realize, oh, this is just a game. And so I heavily associate it with games that really want you to do those little micro swipes and never add it up. Do not add it up. They want 99 cents. It's just 99 cents. It's just 99 cents. It's just 99 cents. Hey, how much have I spent total? It's just 99 cents. It's just 99 cents. I was thinking about taking a little break and playing from this other game. It's just 99 cents. It's just 99 cents. It's just 99 cents. That's what I associate with it. I play some of those games because the gameplay loop itself is fun, but I actively resent the element of the game that forces me to log in on a 18 or 24-hour clock or be punished. How dare me make the mistake of not logging in consecutively for 30 days. Man, it would be really cool for my wife and I one day in our lives to fly to Australia. That would be super cool. Just as life goals, I would love to one day have the time and the money to go to Australia. It's on my bucket list. It really is. It truly, really is on my bucket list to go to Australia. I just think it'd be neat to go there. Oh, but that flight's too long. It's going to break my daily streak in a video game? That is stupid. So they do not have to be daily anymore. We have seen World of Warcraft have the cash system where you can bank these things. Final Fantasy has the leave system where you can bank these things. We have, like, there are all sorts of systems in games that allow you to maybe have a life outside of games. So I don't like just the premise of this concept, regardless of what either of Canon or Ghostcrawler feel about it, because I'm incredibly frustrated at this idea that a video game needs to somehow be more regular than a job. A job is still, on average in the United States, 5 days on, 2 days off. Ah, yeah, but that's real dumb. Final Fantasy has a gardening system that's like this. Well, you can take a weekend from a job, you gotta rest, but you cannot rest from a video game. How dare you? That is just so dumb.
So, dailies, wow, I remember, so in World of Warcraft, we added more dailies because players said, hey, I have nothing to do. I like raiding. I raid with my guild once or twice a week. What am I supposed to do the rest of the time? Originally, it was, oh, go farm flasks and other types of consumables. And over time, that changed to, well, here are some quests you can do, or grinding or whatever, because you want to get X amount of currency every day to kind of... Players said they wanted to play the game more. And so that's the kind of inexpensive way from a developer standpoint. You know, I'm sure players would love to have a new raid, but raids are expensive.
Absolutely, yeah.
Hard thing to do. So while you're waiting for the new raid, here, have some dailies, have some currency, have some grinding.
Sure.
I think the better games offer you choices, which are, again, it's hard to tune, because if you say, look, you could PvP for an hour or you could do quests for 10 minutes, well, everyone will pick the quest. But if you could tune it right to where people can do what they enjoy doing, or even change it up, like, oh, I'm so burned out of killing wolves, I'm going to go PvP instead. Like, that's the sweet spot. And I think that's what, as a player, and as a developer, that's what I enjoy, when the tuning is good so that you can kind of do lots of different things and be okay.
Right.
Player choice and a lack of strict lockouts are where it's at. The idea that once you finish something, you need to take a break from it, time gating it so that it lasts the entire patch cycle, that doesn't bother me. I get it. It's part of development. They can't release content at the rate that we can consume it. So that is a way of artificially stretching some of it to guarantee that there's some meat left on the bone. Time gating can be overused very, 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 very easily. So it's absolutely salt. Salt is a necessary ingredient and is a dominant ingredient in cooking. It does not take a lot of salt to go a very long way. And so I think that time gating is that salt. It adds a little bit of spice. It changes anything that causes player behavior to change. Achievements that cause you to play in a weird way. Anything that causes you to play in a weird way is that spice. It's that zest. And I'm totally fine with there being zest. I'm not even a big fan of salt specifically as a seasoning, me personally. So I order my fries, or as the people across the pond call them, I order my chips without salt, because I typically find that most kitchens are over salting for me. So I don't like a lot of that specific spice, but I still acknowledge it's necessary as a chemical component of good cooking. So time gating is fine. But having multiple spice choices, having multiple flavors that'll get you to the same destination, and giving people reasonable choices. I think the movement to things like weeklies or something that you have a certain amount of time, so you can, I binge on Saturdays, so I can do the whole week's worth on Saturdays, or I can do it slowly throughout the week. So it's once every 3.5 days, or it's twice every week, and that's the same thing. I think that's really, I really think it's nice. And I understand that everybody's going to have different tastes. And so having those different flavors is really awesome. My family will order something salted and then will put extra salt on it. And so you can tell that like there are people that want that salt to be that overwhelming dominant flavor, and I just don't. And so having options for multiple player types to have a satisfying meal with different amounts of salt and different amounts of different spices, where that makes sense. Salt and what? It has to be salt. There has to be something timed, but it could be salt and PvP, right? Salt and that cayenne, that really spicy content. Oh, for me, it's salt and basil, right? That's your questing. That's fine. That's fine. You know, so I think there's some nice options there, as you guys call Reddit the salt mines.
Right. And you're right. It just sucks because like if it gets to the point where it's like I have to do 20 dailies a day or I'm behind, that really sucks. Feeling
and I'm gonna let my friends down because you know they're depending on me. I'm the healer, I'm the tank, whatever. And now that guilt sucks. It's funny because back we were talking about earlier about smoothing off the rough edges of games. The way most people played EverQuest was you would go out and you'd do some quests, and then you'd run out of quests, and then you'd go grind on some wolves or whatever. And one of WoW's big innovations was, hey, you're never gonna reach that point where you have to go grind. Like when you finish the quest, there's gonna be another quest, and then another quest. And WoW let you go not only from 0 to 60 just doing quests, but having options like, oh, I don't want to go to this zone. Next time I'm going to go to a different zone.
Right.
And that was kind of their big innovation. So adding lots of quests filled in the grind, but then in the end game, the daily quests almost become a different kind of grind that you log in every day. I don't love logging into games every day. Sometimes I don't want to play a game. I want to watch TV. Sometimes I want to go out with my friends.
But players ask for this, right? Because imagine you do like logging in every day. Imagine right now you're just in a WoW kick and you're logging into Dragonflight every single day. And then imagine somebody who just plays a couple hours a week gets all the same stuff as you. So they're like, man, wouldn't it be cool if there was something to reward me for all this time I'm putting in? So the reward comes from a very natural place of, I want to be rewarded for the time I'm putting in game. And so they say, yeah, that's awesome. And so these grinds that have come out of Legion and then BFA and Shadowlands came from a very, very natural, organic response to players are doing this content and they want a reward. Wouldn't it be cool if I got rewarded for questing after experience was no longer relevant? Wouldn't it be cool if I could progress my character besides just when I have a raid group? Wouldn't it be cool if it starts that way? But then it can very, very, very quickly get out of hand, right? It's over salted. Somebody goes, God, I love how salty this is. And so then the cook goes back and goes, okay, be sure not to forget the salt on the next order. So they do a little extra shake. Oh my gosh, that saltiness, it stings the lips a little. That was really nice. That was really nice. Could you do a little more? Yeah, actually it drastically changes the recipe if you cook with the salt and not just apply it at the end. So I'm going to cook with part of the salt and then I'm still going to dust a little over the top at the end. Oh my gosh, this salt, it's so bright. It's so zesty. I love it. And then one day you wake up and it's not edible. You've begun using tablespoons instead of teaspoons, and there is no way to consume this. And then you say it's too salty, and you get up and leave, and the chef's like, but all you ever complimented me on was salt.
It feels mean when you're like requiring people to log in every single day without fail or they fall behind. Logging in every few days or maybe once a week, that I can commit to. For a game I love, I don't mind playing once a week.
One of the things that I feel like Lost Ark does do well, this doesn't excuse all the dailies in my opinion, but they do have rest bonus that you can stack throughout the week, and like you get like double the loot. I feel like that's a pretty good system to really kind of take a break, right? What are your thoughts on alts? Because I'm personally not a big fan of alts. Yet I'm playing a game that revolves around having a lot of alts, but I hated alts. I'm very much a one character person. One of the things I really liked about Final Fantasy is that I could play other classes, but still play my character, if that makes sense, rather than, hey, you know what I mean? Like, what are your thoughts on alts in MMOs?
Now, my opinions have changed a little bit over time there. When I started playing MMOs, I thought like everyone should have a main, and alts like it's almost like a failure in the game if someone has an alt, because like my friend Andy, he's a hunter, and I just want to know that Andy's a hunter. It's a role-playing game, right? We're each going to play a role. I'm a warrior, he's a hunter. And then when he starts playing his mage instead, I'm like, well, that's weird. You're a hunter. I don't like to think of you as both people. I want to know that when you're on, you're a hunter. And then my thinking shifted a little bit, because I mentioned before the thought of novelty. Well, there's hardly anything in a game that gives you more novelty than playing a different class. It's like, I have to think about things differently. I have a different rotation. I care about different stats, different drops. I do different things in fighting. So there is a lot of value in that. So I think the sweet spot, again, comes down to, is playing an alt like restarting the game from scratch? Or at the opposite extreme, is playing an alt just kind of a cosmetic change, because like, if you don't actually need to run additional dungeons to get gears for your alt, like why have an alt, right? You're just, that's basically just, I want to look like an elf instead of a dwarf or something.
Right. Do you like how Final Fantasy has done it?
I think it's a clever solution in that, and I assume your viewers all know, but Final Fantasy lets you just have one character who could be lots of different classes, but only one at a time, and you just kind of switch.
Right.
It's really cool, because if you like your character, you don't have to switch. You're like, I can do anything with this character. The bummer is, if a new like race or something comes out, you don't get a different experience. You can't say, what is I can't remember the name of the Drakthir, the new dragon people in the new WoW expansion. Like, they come out, and you're like, well, I don't need them, because my one character can already do it all.
Right.
And because what I really like about MMOs is the social aspect and playing with friends. It kind of turns me off when someone is, well, I can solve any problem with alts. And to give you an example, when I started playing World of Warcraft, like, you need to find an enchanter. Like, you want something enchanted, go find an enchanter. You want someone to pick a lot.
All right, so they've talked a lot about Final Fantasy XIV here, and I don't get the impression that either of them primary in that game. And so as somebody that is primarily a Final Fantasy XIV player, that is the main MMO that I spend my effort on and spend time covering and generating content for, and is the main game that I think about. My wife was talking about having some friends over for dinner, what day would work best for me early in January, and I immediately thought about what day in January is the patch for Final Fantasy XIV. If it's all the same to them, what night they come over, the night that is the patch is a nice night for me to know that I like to have that kind of in mind. So the only game I thought of when I thought of kind of whether or not we could hang out was Final Fantasy XIV. It is the dominant game in my life. Is Final Fantasy XIV alt friendly? There is a very, very, very real argument that no, it's not alt friendly, because as Ghostcrawler noted, if you ever want to go back through the game, if you ever want to go through on a different race, anybody who wants to re-experience the story, while they do have a mode that doesn't give any reward at all to go back and experience story, if you want to go through and get experience on a different class, if you want to have access to multiple raid lockouts so that you can get gear on a healer in a raid group with your one group of friends and loot on your tank with a different or even the same group of friends, you would need 2 alts. And for that, you will have to clear all 600 hours or more of the story on each of those characters. So it is not alt friendly. On the other hand, for the typical player, the player who just wants to clear all the story once, just wants to run each raid once, just wants to try each of the classes, but primary on one, the vast majority of Final Fantasy XIV is doable on one character. And so Final Fantasy XIV, I would consider, if I was just going to make quick single statement summaries of the game and compare MMOs, I would say that to have a full featured experience and be able to have access to all the crafting professions, all of the narratives, and all of the rating, Final Fantasy XIV is way on the end of being a main game only, main character only, and actually, if anything, punishes you more for having alts than what it opens up. It is more effort to have an alt in Final Fantasy than it is the amount of content that it unlocks for you. as opposed to games that are more account-wide friendly. And I would put something like Guild Wars 2 on the far end of that, where having alts is wildly not only rejoiced but celebrated. Your main can literally receive items while doing things like PvP that level up your alts. You can receive experience for your alts. The vast majority of gear in the game is account bound. And their hardest to get items in the game actually have an account-wide armory system so that you have access to those account-wide items from any of your characters at any time. And so it is very, very, very account-driven. As far as what alts offer, that it becomes a question of how do you offer replayability? Is your replayability about going through on a different class? And you're going to do things like create heirloom systems in World of Warcraft that make it easier, or you're going to create challenging modes where going back through you can hold yourself to a higher difficulty, or maybe just doing it different like Guild Wars, where throughout the story you may have had a chance to go left through a door, a set of doors, and when you come through on your alt there is a different achievement for going right, and you eventually want to get all of them. And so it starts to create agency in a game, but in a way that does not punish the devs for building two ways to play. If you build two ways to play in an MMO, they've already talked about how expensive it is to build and maintain MMOs. It feels very weird then that you would design systems in the game that only half your players enjoy. And so a lot of times in games, a lot of the story beats don't have a lot of choice. So they pick the path for you and you just ride the train tracks to that destination. In Guild Wars, there are a lot of times where you get at least some minor choices. And that is because they know you're going to get access to the writing when you come back through on your second or your third or your fourth character, as it were. And so these alts are something that, as they talk about Final Fantasy XIV, I would put way on the end of not having alts. But the downside is then when they add female Hrothgar with the upcoming 7.0, where we expect it to be announced, or when they added male Hrothgar or female or male Viera, there is a very real thing of like, now do I have to race change to experience that? Because everything of mine is invested on my one character.
Go find a rogue who can lockpick.
Right.
What it turned into is everyone had an enchanter. It's like, well, I have an alt as an enchanter. I'll just enchant my own stuff. I don't need other players. I'm like a one-man army. And so that kind of bums me out a little bit because I really love the player interactions. And I think, you know, with the player economy and BDO did a really good job of that, of like, you need other players. You can't just solve it all yourself.
I feel like that's something that Vanilla Arcade and Albion did very well. You have certain people that can craft certain things, and within that, it needs certain things, and that requires different professions and stuff like that. And it just became, I'm looking for a carpenter, or I'm looking for someone that can make weapons or something like that. And that definitely enhanced my experience as a player in the game, for sure. I get what you're saying. Definitely.
And I think there are ways to have alts that don't let you kind of be the one-man army, and maybe, you know, maybe their games will figure out ways to do that.
Right. Okay. So moving on, as far as the progression goes, your thoughts?
So as he moves into progression, they're kind of talking about like, should people be able to solo get all the content in the game? That's a really mixed question, right? Because people who have a really small friend group or like to play by themselves don't want to feel gated by other players, but in large, but the interaction is part of what makes an MMO feel really special as a genre. I think it's best done when it's tied to group content should be tied to group progression, and solo content should be tied to solo progression. So when you talk about crafters and gatherers, it's a pretty lonely thing. Can it be done in communities and groups and have groupthink? Absolutely. But it is largely something you do by yourself. So I think that's fine. But to take crafting and gathering and say, okay, well then what's tied to having access to multiple people? Well, maybe if we have raid gear, raid crafting available, then maybe your raid group needs to invest in something and like that. So, and so having raid dropped recipes, those don't really become available to the true solo players until much later. And so I think having like solo things locked to solo makes a lot of sense, and having group things tied to group progression makes so like having a mix. I don't think it's just one or the other. Having people that feel like a one-man army for the bulk of the game should be an option if they're willing to put in the time.
Your thoughts on horizontal versus vertical progress in MMOs?
I think you need both. Like, I don't tend to stick with games that are just horizontal because I like to get more powerful. That's kind of
Absolutely.
the, you know, I came into to digital role-playing games from Dungeons and Dragons and physical role-playing games. So that's just what I think about a game is, you get more powerful, you get better spells, you get a better weapon. I do like having some amount of horizontal progression because it just, the crappy way to say it is it gives you another bar to fill up. And like, if you're stuck on one thing, you can go work on something else.
Right.
Really smart games like Civilization have that, I want to play one more turn feel, because you're almost about to finish something. And even if like one goal is really, really far away, you turn around, another goal is really close. And then by the time you finish that goal, the other goal isn't that far away as it used to be.
Right.
And so, you can see where that's going. So I think clever horizontal progression does that.
Right.
It also kind of lets players do what they want. Like someone who says, well, I like raiding okay, but it's not my main thing. What I really like to do is, be a blacksmith and make armor and weapons for other players. Like, it gives them a way to kind of focus on that without it just being make the number go up, make the DPS go up.
What about obtaining and enhancing gear? You've got games like Lost Ark and BDO where you don't get drops with weapons in your gear for the most part. You just enhance it. And it's like the higher you go, the less the percentage it is. And then it's just like, hey, I've got a 0.01% chance for this to go versus doing this epic raid boss and then getting the drop and being the lucky one to get the drop. And it's like, well, if you think about your odds of getting mythic item, whatever the highest grade is in a big raid, it's kind of works out to be the same thing. It's just packaged differently. What are your thoughts and preferences?
So the horizontal progression versus vertical progression, before he moves into this next topic. Vertical progression is climbing a mountain towards the peak. It gives you a North Star to aim for. And horizontal progression is something that allows you to spend a lot of time playing a lot of different ways at one level playing field. And so once you have everything you need from that tier of content, you feel like there's largely nothing else that's really as rewarding as it was at first. And so none of the gear, it's just changing the way you play. The horizontal progression is really nice because, as he noted, you can finish up one task, and before you move into the next task, it may have already progressed. And so you may have a weekly thing on cooldown, and then you go do this other thing, and then by the time you do enough days of that, it's time to go back to the first thing. And so it gives you something to do that jumps around, and it's all very lateral. However, vertical, anything except climbing higher, doesn't always really help you. You've got to climb higher. Higher is all that matters. And having a mix of both definitely is the name of the game. No one game seems to thrive on simply nothing but horizontal progression. They tend to struggle where people achieve everything they wanted to achieve and now don't know why they would even keep playing. And then meanwhile, games that are exclusively vertical progression tend to fatigue players out if they don't have any form of some system that will allow them to invest in something cosmetic or lateral, or at this point you have a choice between PvPing with your free time or running dungeons. So every game needs a little bit of elements where it gets you two destinations to, let's assume we're only talking about power here, 2 sources of the lower item level gear, or maybe 5 sources of the lower, 2 sources of the mid, and 1 source of the high. Having a little bit of lateral, especially for things like alts or more casual players, is really great. But if you don't have any reason to chase the top, sometimes people say like, yeah, I played that game, I never really felt like I had a direction to go, because every direction felt equal. So because the game never felt them direction, they tend to just kind of burn out of the game.
Okay, I've got a 0.01% chance for this to go versus doing this epic raid boss and then getting the drop and being the lucky one to get the drop. And it's like, well, if you think about your odds of getting mythic item, whatever the highest grade is in a big raid, it's kind of works out to be the same thing. It's just packaged differently. What are your thoughts and preferences?
Again, I hate to keep going as an answer, but there's the reason these problems aren't solved is because there's pros and cons, right?
Absolutely.
I love the moment of like killing the dragon, opening up the chest and like seeing what's inside. It's lame if it's just a bunch of crafting materials. It's cool if it's like, oh, it's a magic sword. That's awesome.
It is.
On the other hand, when you think about the fantasy of a lot of these characters, you know, King Arthur had Excalibur and Aragorn has Anduril. It's not like Aragorn killed an orc and the orc dropped a better sword, so he vendors Anduril and now he has a new sword. You know, that feels weird. So I get the idea that, like, no, this is my sword and I'm just going to focus on making it better and better. I'm not going to throw it aside just because an axe fell out.
Right,
So
right.
There's different ways to do it. A game like Diablo, Path of Exile, they're very based on disposable gear. Like, you're going to go through gear really quickly and you're constantly going to get gear, but you're never going to get that feeling of like, this is my sword, because, you know, you're going to go through it a lot.
Right. Personally, you don't have a preference. Like, there's obviously pros and cons to both. Yeah.
There's pros and cons to both. I think some games do one style better than others.
From a player's perspective, do you think it's a little bit more off-putting with the whole enhancement route?
If you feel like you literally have to win the lottery to get an item, it's like, oh, there's a 1 in a million chance of this item dropping. That's pretty brutal. Yeah. On the other hand, winning the lottery is awesome. And if you do get a sword and you're like, only 1 in a million players have this sword, you feel like a badass, even though it was just random, right? It's just luck that you got it. But that's something special. And I think we've almost lost something in games now that players have the expectation of, I'm gonna finish my gear. I'm gonna look at what the best in slot items are. I'm gonna acquire them all, and that's kind of my journey. Because then you never will have that moment of nobody else has this weapon. Like, I'm the only one that has this weapon, and people are gonna see me in town and be like, dude, I can't believe you got that. Because if you want that to be the case, then like 0.01 chance of something dropping is like way too high. It has to be like 0.0000, or thousands of players are going to get it on the first day.
It's one of those things where it's like, the harder an item is to get, it is off-putting because people don't get it. But if you are one of the few that get it, that's like, I mean, everyone wants to show off, right? Show how big their stuff is, right? Like, when it comes to an MMO, like, look at me. Like, everyone wants that.
I think that's where loot guarantee systems really thrive as the hybrid. I don't think there's one size fits all, or the whole industry would just copy it. But I think that's where those kind of guaranteed loot systems thrive. So that could be that after a certain number of weeks of raid content, another way to get the same gear becomes available, or the content becomes easier to run so that you have more access to the loot table. That could be the loot table itself literally opens up. That could be literal loot guaranteed changes. Some games handle where your odds get higher each time you do not get the drop that you need. That could be, you know, that could end up being something closer to where a separate item drops that's a vendor-based item. And so after you build up enough of that item, or after a number of weeks, that vendor opens up and will just sell you the exact thing you wanted. Final Fantasy XIV does this with mounts in their extreme versions. 99 totems will buy you the mount, but you only get 1 or 2 totems per clear. And so you are way better off getting the mount to drop. It just may not drop. And when it does drop, you may not win the roll. And so that would be way better if you could get it to drop, but there's nothing you can do about that. So 99 is an immense number of clears, but the idea of saying, well, at least I know it's working towards it. And depending on the length of the extreme fight, they either drop 1 totem or 2, so that it's always kind of the same roughly number of hours. All right, that at least tells me that I will get it one day. And so, like, I definitely think that the hybrid there is to have a loot guarantee system of some kind. That could be a currency you grind for a vendor that gets you there. That could be weekly upgrade tokens. That could be a loot guaranteed drop rate thing where the odds get higher each time you don't have success until eventually they're at a 100% drop rate. It doesn't matter what it is. I just think it's nice when there's some element of the gamble, that feeling of, oh my gosh, I got this on week 1. That's amazing. That makes me so rare. But this idea that there is a bad luck guarantee. The bad luck protection system that just kind of, as you guys are noting in chat, the pity system that says, this is a game. This is a game. It's not a finite resource. We don't have to have winners and losers. You know, we don't have to have the lottery be something that not everybody can win. After a certain number of weeks, everybody can win. We're all going to move on to the new patch in 4 months or whatever. By, you know, after the first month's going to be really rare. Second month's going to be kind of rare. Third month's going to be, if you've been playing a lot, you might have a chance. Fourth month, we're going to make it pretty common. And when we move into the next patch, just go back and get it. It's fine. It's yours. I don't care. And if you're somebody who's been playing actively that entire 5-month span, just have it. Just have it. Here you go. I don't care. I think a lot of those end up very, very popular because it takes away the feels bad while retaining the feels good moment.
I think it's off-putting because the games give us the expectation that, oh, you are able to get that, like you should get it. I think one of the most brilliant things that the Battle Royale games do is when you know there's 100 players, you know your chance of being the last player is really rare. Like 99 other players have to screw up for you to be that last player.
Right.
So you go in with the expectation that you probably won't get it. And then when you do get it, and most people get it eventually, like it feels amazing. And you tell all your friends and like chicken dinner, whatever is great because you don't expect it. And I wish we could get MMOs back to that point of, I don't expect to get a new item, so when I do, it feels wonderful.
That much better.
Okay, so his example...
But it's hard. It's hard. No one wants to...
Okay, so his example was battle royales. In current modern day and age, his example was the idea that you win, and you knew it was rare. If you win a battle royale, Fortnite being the dominant name in most people's eyes if they have never played a battle royale, but there are many out there. If you win, it has no meaningful, impactful, and in most MMOs places, none whatsoever impact on your ability to win or lose the next one beyond the player skill that you now bring to the table as you continue to improve whether or not you won. So, effectively what Ghostcrawler is calling for is a day when there was something we wanted, but it didn't matter if we got. And he argued to harken back to a day when you were excited to get loot, but you weren't chasing your bis. But the reason you weren't chasing your bis is not because there was not a bis. As we've watched through things like WoW Classic, there was a bis, we just didn't know about it. So he is arguing to either go back to cosmetic rewards or a time of ignorance. People who are just equipping the highest item level they got, and they're running the raid blindly, no awareness of the loot table, and if it drops, it drops. If it's better, it's better. Moving on is great. The moment you become aware of the total loot table, and you strategically plan out what loot you want, and you fail to get that, that sucks. So the only way to avoid that in a day and an age where we can now all collaborate on the knowledge we have is there will always be a bis for a particular objective. If you're trying to clear a raid in game, there is always a best in slot your class can have that will give it the most, let's say, damage output as a metric inside that raid boss or that raid as a whole tier. And anything less than that is worse by some measurable degree. It is BIS. I don't care if you think that, oh, but this is the best gear I've received. I don't care. There is better. And anything less than that, you are satisfying for less, which means technically to acquire the highest possible outcome, you need to not only execute whatever the game expects you to execute as far as abilities and things like that, but you need to be doing so in that best gear, which means you need to run it till that best gear drops. And as you get closer and closer to it, where you just are running the entire raid for 1 piece, 2 pieces, 3 pieces, and that's all you can get. Every time those bosses fall down, and they are a boss that does not have a piece of loot you need, or they are a boss that does, and the right piece does not drop, doesn't feel good. Now that doesn't feel good, doesn't feel good, doesn't feel good, does feel good. Part of what makes that grind really rewarding is knowing I ran 4 raids with my friends, got no loot, and then on the 5th week I did. So I'm not saying, oh, I gotta get loot every week or it doesn't feel good. Grind is part of it. Sometimes the goal is worth it because of the journey, the struggle along the way. But that struggle is there. But what he is arguing for are rewards that if I don't get them, do not over punish me. And the only way to do that is cosmetics. Cosmetics. It's mount drops, it's things like that. It's cosmetics. Or to have a pity system where you agreed going in, odds are I will get my weapon upgrade from this tier of rating on the 4th week or the 5th week or whatever, but everybody has a 1% chance of getting it each week. And that was pretty cool that one time that I got it in week 2. So what he's yearning for is only solved by incredibly precise pity systems or cosmetics. That's all he's arguing for. Because the first example that came to mind was a game where power was not tied to the RNG. He's implying that the outcome of Battle Royale is RNG. I don't think that's entirely accurate, because there are people that are popular on Twitch because they are winning a lot more than 1% of their games. But as he noted, if you play long enough, you'll eventually win one, or place top 3 or whatever. You will. Camp in enough bushes, you'll get there. But the win is just that. It's nothing. It's a win. It doesn't matter. If you were getting dropped into better portions of the map with guaranteed better weapons as a result of how many times you've won this season, suddenly that very same, ooh, it could be anybody's game in Fortnite, would not feel good. You would be in some lobby with a bunch of people that had all epic weapons because they've all won before, and they dropped right into the best buildings, and you would get your butt pounded every time, and it would not feel good. So what he is arguing for is only possible in MMORPGs if it is not tied to power. And the only way it's not tied to power is if the thing that is rare is not power, or the power itself is guaranteed at a rate substantially higher than the odds. 1% chance of drop, guaranteed after 5 clears, or whatever.
Raid, kill a dragon.
So you do like having certain items, like, let's just use that as an example, the Sword of 1,000 Truths, like that in a game, like that mysterious weapon or item that it could be in the form of a mount even too. Like you like having.
Invincible in World of Warcraft is like that, super rare, and so people were so excited when they saw it, and they would show it off.
Whoa. Okay, so then he says, like the Sword of 1,000 Truths, that if I play enough WoW, a USB drive will allow, and I can insert it, and I can become the power of all powers. So you like that? And he said, yes, like that rare mount that's in game. I just want to note, Cannon talked about power that entire conversation. And Ghostcrawler said, yes, totally the same thing, but with things that don't matter. Cosmetic wins, power wins. Cosmetic wins, power wins. RNG with power does not feel good. It doesn't. A little goes a very long way. A little goes a very long way, because a bad luck streak is an incredibly bitter taste in the mouth. It just tastes like your mouth is bleeding. You've been punched in the teeth so many times. All you have is that copper taste, and your friends are like, look at our loot, look at our loot. And you're like, great. My hunter went all of the Burning Crusade from when Girl's Lair dropped to the end, and I never saw the DST drop. That didn't make it more fun. Cool. Super cool. Yeah, that's awesome. But rare mounts, right? That's fine. Turn right back around. The next expansion in Wrath of the Lich King, the very first week of Archivon, I got the Grand Black War Mammoth. Cool. And you know what my friends thought, who literally for years went back and soloed that and never saw it drop? I'm really happy for you, man, because they don't need it. The Legion Legendary system had a guaranteed drop rate right until you got a Legendary. That was fine. People liked that pity element. Oh wait, I'm only talking about people who eventually won the right Legendary. Huh. How did people feel who got benched from their raid group because they farmed up multiple Legion Legendaries only to get the wrong ones? Were they just as happy with Legion? Power, cosmetics. Power, right? Cosmetics, right here. Power, cosmetics. Yeah, I totally love when they make power locked behind RNG. Like that one rare mount. There's nothing powerful about having invincible.
Last thing in regards to progression, I just want this will be a quick one, but one of the biggest turnoffs that I've had with BDO, and to this day I don't know why they have it, breaking and downgrading gear, backwards progression. I personally hate it. I really hope that's not in the Riot MMO. Your thoughts on backwards progression?
At Riot, we talk a lot about high highs and low lows, right? And PvP games tend to have high highs and low lows. And low low is like, wow, this sucks. Like, I didn't just get beat, I got crushed. I got annihilated. And it feels weird to say that you want that in a game, but it matters, because if you got annihilated, some other player is like,
feeling great.
I feel great. I got a pentakill, whatever. So I think there's some advantage to having low lows, having like durability on gear, or having it break, or you have a chance to improve it and actually downgrades. I don't know that that's enough to make the good moments feel good. It just kind of feels crappy. It's like, not worth it.
The last two sections I want to talk to you about is...
Okay, so high highs and low lows. The extreme examples he used there are PvP type things. My brothers and I always explain to our wives who hear us shouting obscenities at our TVs and ask us whether or not we're having fun in Call of Duty. We explain to them that Call of Duty is a game that actually puts the fun out, like the Hunger Games, as a finite amount of fun in the match. Except that fun is actually distributed on all the players' bodies. And the only way to receive fun in Call of Duty is to go take it from another player. Somebody has to not have fun in a Call of Duty match for somebody else to have fun. There is no "we all had a good time." If you are in a public match of Call of Duty, there is one amount of fun. And if you had it, your opponent did not. And so that is the far end of that spectrum, as opposed to more sandbox style games where we're all having a good time. The low lows and high highs. I think that element of risk is part of what makes the high highs worth it. So when you talk about something like a hardcore game, people who play like hardcore Diablo 2, or are trying to do a no-hit run or something like that, this idea of downgrading, losing experience, permadeath, any of these concepts are very, very high stakes. You're playing Russian roulette with your character, and if you make a mistake, you will lose progress. It is theoretically possible that if you are not on your game and something goes poorly, really sucks when it's not your fault, ISP or something like that, you could literally log in this evening and log out with less progress than you logged in. That is theoretically possible. But what that also means is the people who have made the most progress have achieved something truly incredible. My brothers both really love hardcore games, so the idea of losing a little experience or permanently losing a character is something they are all in on. They love that gut-wrenching, butterfly-tingling, this moment matters. It's all on the line, double or nothing, championship match, nothing else matters. I bet my entire house on this. They love that. They thrive on that risk. And if there is not a leaderboard at the end of some PvE element, why do we even have it? Why are all games not PvP? That is the way both my brothers play. It's a huge impact on my kind of competitiveness, is that I have constantly been told my entire upbringing by my brothers every time they're better than me. And as a result, I do like to let them know when I'm better than them. However, I have other friends in my life, people like Brian that I run Work to Game with, that are a lot less competitive. He thinks of himself as competitive because he's been able to succeed in those environments. He was a collegiate baseball player, and so he's been able to thrive in those environments, but he is a lot more of, I just want to chill, I want to fill the bars. If something good happens to you, that is not necessarily bad for me. If you're better at something than me, I'm excited for you. And it's a lot more relaxing, and I enjoy that as well. I see a value in that more casual mindset, instead of that hardcore, I have to go out and take what is mine. I see a value in that, and it's wonderful. It's a beautiful world to live in. Which one should your game be? That's not a finite answer, right? So Cannon's like, Riot isn't going to pick the bad one, right? I, Cannon, do not like to lose progress. That's a bad design. You're not going to do that, right? Well, I don't know that that's the best solution, but we like high stakes gaming. High highs and low lows. Small mistake should come with a small penalty. A big mistake, possibly a big penalty. To the degree at which your game is going to set those stakes. In some games, dying is made fun. In other games, the threat of dying is looming over you. When you're playing Mario and you die towards the end of a level and you have to go back to the very beginning, it sucks. It sucks. If there are not checkpoints on a particular stretch of a level and you have to go back to the beginning, jump puzzles in games are like this. Low lows. But when you make it to the top, oh, those sweet high highs. I made it to the top of the Kugane Tower for my very first time during a digital fan fest in Final Fantasy XIV, and I will always remember it. Anybody who said that they can get to that light post without somebody rezzing them is lying as far as I'm concerned. It's a myth, because I've made it to the top now multiple times and I cannot land on that stupid lamppost. But high highs, literally high highs. But it sucks when you miss the second to the last jump. Meanwhile, in a PvP match, you die some. That's okay. Small penalties, small mistakes. You're gonna die in PvP. That's the nature of it. How many times did you die tonight in PvP? I have no idea. So I think that high highs, low lows is a really good design philosophy. Not so much about, well, this one game has this one version of low lows, and that's bad, right? No. Losing experience is perfectly valid if the act of death was easily avoidable. If the only way to die in Bozja Zadnor is to separate from the pack, just don't die. And if you're rezzed by another player, a large amount of that penalty goes away because dying in a group is more valid. What is that message? Don't play alone. That's the message. Do not venture out alone in Bozja Zadnor in Final Fantasy XIV. That's fine. I think it's fine. They didn't bring it out to the rest of the game because it doesn't make sense there. So I think games have gotten better at having more types of low lows and more types of high highs, and so they can better marry them. It sucks when the reward is like, I got a piece of loot that I had to get for a quest, but if I died, I lost experience. So I had to take the risk to finish the quest, which didn't feel like that big of a high, but then I had this risk at this low. I think they are getting better at marrying the truly highest things. The ability to make it to the top of a Final Fantasy XIV Deep Dungeon solo without dying has to be one of the highest high single-player PvE experiences possible. A lot of low lows available for those players. Story mode in games, you really never die. You're also not ever going to get the clip where somebody is jumping up and down screaming at the mere act of finishing the story. They might be excited about what the story contains, but the achievement popping up and saying you did it, they're like, guys, I did it. I completed my 1000th quest. Isn't that amazing? No. And so in that element, the story, the high highs and low low are tied to the narrative element, your feelings of a particular character dying versus overcoming some great triumph, not the mechanics of clearing a story quest. You killed 10 bears. Woo! So tying the right high highs to the right low lows is the better answer. So if there's going to be experience being lost, that should be because there is a chance at unbelievable experience to be gained. Not, I tried to get access to a narrative beat and I lost progress. That doesn't feel good at all.
Is the classes and PvP. But as far as
Worth it.
the last two sections I want to talk to you about is the classes and PvP. But as far as the classes go, you mentioned that classes in Lost Ark really stand out. What are your thoughts on classes in general for MMOs?
It depends a lot on what the design is. Like in World of Warcraft, adding a new class was very expensive for a number of reasons. For one, there were like class-specific armor. So you know when you add a new class now that every raid tier needs to have like armor for this character. But it wasn't just armor, it was you have to make sure there's room in the raid to like bring this new class, because if you're bringing, you know, if you're bringing the Death Knight, that may be one less spot for the Paladin or something. So you have to think about stuff like that. You could make a system where adding classes is relatively cheap, but that would have to mean that each class is less distinct, right? Like you probably don't have a whole talent tree or something like that. You probably can't have a lot of unique art because that, you know, there's just only so many hours of the day you can make art. And if you're making lots of different armor for different classes, you're just going to have fewer classes by definition.
Let's say an MMO is out, right? Like it's up and running. Realistically,
So what he's talking about there is basically class balance versus class homogenization. If you want every class to be capable of everything in a game where it doesn't matter which class you bring, then they have to be largely all capable of doing all the same things. So you don't get that unique taste. However, if you want to be able to bring whatever you want, or you want to be able to add a new class every patch to a game, they need to be very much the same thing, so they're all capable of the same power. If you want to have them all be cosmetically different, then you have to have a lot of time to spend on art assets, as opposed to if you just want to have a large number of them, maybe they visually don't end up with as much variety. And so there is a balance there. And so some games tend to have just a handful of classes, but they are wildly different flavors. One of the iconic games of my childhood, Diablo 2, feels like this. Not that many classes, lots of ways to play, lots of balance, lots of gear to grind on each individual class. But those classes, there's only going to be so many classes you can play. So you either like Sorceress or you don't, right? There's not 20 different magic casters. There's Sorceress, and the flavors locked within. The act of playing Sorceress already kind of pigeonholes you, and there's only so many choices. As opposed to modern World of Warcraft that has a great deal larger number of classes. And yet that ultimately starts to then bring up all sorts of questions about how often do they add new ones. And then you have to start bringing in balance, and balance is a separate thing. And so as you start to look at having 30 plus specs in World of Warcraft, balance is a constant struggle. Final Fantasy XIV has gone through these undulations where the game feels really, really balanced, but a lot of the classes feel capable of doing exactly the same thing. Or these individual times where it feels like something is starting to get a lot of personality, but then you see it's over or underutilized in the raid because that personality is either useful or it's not.
When it comes to the budget of it and the time investment of releasing a new class, what would you say is a good pace for a new class release for an MMO that's active and has a pretty good budget?
When we try to think of the way to answer this,
So, just before he even addresses this, because I'll let him think. While Ghostcrawler's thinking of his answer, every class you add is now content you have to maintain forever. If you add a dungeon to the game and you have 5 classes in the game and it is run in 3-man groups, then you need to balance it for any combination of any 3 characters across those 5 classes. If you start to break down games into the Trinity, you have to be able to have any of maybe, let's say, the 5 tanks, any of the 5 healers, and then any 3 of, let's say, the 5 DPS in a 15 class system. And so you have to plan for that. And World of Warcraft has kind of different roles locked underneath. They have specs underneath each class. So let's just assume specs are classes. And so there's actually 30 plus ways to play. Guild Wars has their main classes are called professions, but each one gets a build for each expansion. And so there is one for their core Tyria, one for Heart of Thorns, Path of Fire, and now End of Dragon. So there was 4 big bulky ways to play within each of the professions. And within those, there's sub flavors because they have a lot of build variety, kind of like the World of Warcraft talent trees within Dragonflight. Final Fantasy, each class is only that one way. There is no way to modify them. They are one way. Every paladin is a tank with the same abilities, shooting for the same gear. All tanks wear fending gear, so it's very, very flat. And you have, I think there's 17 classes across the game. So there's 17 ways to play. But what you ultimately end up with is every single time you have a tank slot in a piece of content, 1 to 3, depending on the content, you end up with a paladin, a gunbreaker, a warrior, or a Dark Knight have to be able to fill that slot. And any of those 4 or any combination of those 4 should be capable of clearing the content. And that means, by its very nature, all of them have to have abilities to mitigate tank busters. All of them have to have the ability to stun abilities that are supposed to be stunned. It's 19, that's 9. And so you end up with this 2 dozen ways to play, and that means when you add a new raid, if you add 5 more tanks to the game, so now you have a total of 9, now all 9 of those have to be able to slot in, which means they can only be so different from each other. So every time you add a new one, that not only puts restrictions on how different the other ones can be, but it also puts restrictions on the content. Because when a new raid gets added, it has to be runnable with all of them. And so if you have 9 tanks in the game, and they are all different than each other, that means when a new raid boss gets added, every mechanic that raid boss is allowed to do, everything the raid encounter is allowed to introduce, has to be something that is achievable. And so if half your tanks have stuns and the other half do not have stuns, you cannot have a boss that will wipe the raid if an ability is not stunned. Because that means that in half of your tanks, they are no longer allowed to run that content because the group is wanting a clear. So every DPS, every tank either needs a stun or every boss cannot have something that's stunnable. So it's a dialogue back and forth. So to ask what budget it is to add jobs, to add these classes, Final Fantasy XIV adds 2 to 3 per expansion. So far, always. Is that sustainable? Guild Wars does not add new ones, but instead adds a new way to play to each of their existing, I believe it's 9 professions. I could be getting these numbers wrong. So now they're adding 9 ways to play every expansion, so far without exception. World of Warcraft adds roughly 1 class with, let's say, about 2 ways to play every other expansion. So far, that's about right. It's not about the cost of adding these that makes them problematic. While they do appear relatively linear, it does appear to be something that's just a factor of cost. If you imagine an infinite number of expansions, 20 expansions, 30 expansions, as these games are now over a decade old and are planning for the next one, is it sustainable? It's not just a cost issue, because all of the games I just named also have to remain backwards compatible, which means they now have to maintain balancing for all existing classes. And so if they have to add a new raid boss with a new weapon design or armor design for each class, the cost of building a boss for a game with 10 classes is less than a cost with the same amount of variety, but now for 20 classes, or 30 classes, or 40 classes. And so you see these games starting to avoid that. So you see Final Fantasy heavily leaning on role quests and role gear. You start to see World of Warcraft moving to one piece of druid gear that handles its way across all the druid specs. You move away from class tier sets into leather sets that are equipable across all the leather, because you can't just keep doing this. It's not sustainable. So it's not an issue of flat cost. It's $100,000. So just $100,000 plus inflation, and you can do this forever. At 100 classes, these games don't work. They don't function. So because you either have 100 ways to play that are all distinct and are not identical at all, and then there's no way to balance it because the content cannot account for 15 billion different possibilities, or all the ways are identical, in which case it's not really 100 ways to play, it's just 100 different skins. So this gets really, really hard in any game. It could be in MOBAs, it could be in Apex Legends, whatever you want to do. If there is distinct ways to play, it gets more expensive with each one you add because that one now mixes in with all the others. If you can bring any 2 of 4 classes and you can bring pairs of identical classes, then of the 4, you have 4 options for slot 1, 4 options for slot 2. You have 16 combinations for pairs. If you add a 3rd slot for a group of content, because we're going to have 3-man content, and you allow any 4 of the classes to come, that immediately jumps to 64 ways to play. Now, let's go into the future where this game has 10 classes. But let's keep adding 3-man content that is designed to be balanced, and we want all 10 classes to feel distinct, both in the way they play individually and the way they interact. It is different to run 3 mages than 1 mage and 2 warlocks, than 1 mage, a warlock, and a warrior. Okay. Now we have 1,000 ways to play. 10 times 10 is 100, 100 times 10 is 1,000. Now instead of balancing 64 theoretical class comps, when you are designing the encounter, you have to account for 1,000. So you've either got to dumb down the difference between the classes, or you've got to dumb down the content. Because 1,000 is not 64. And it's not an issue of cost, because it is exponential every time you add one.
I think in general, you can add more classes earlier in the life cycle of the game and then slow it down. And that's kind of what we've done with League of Legends. Is we used to add new champions pretty quickly, and now it's only a few a year. Again, it depends on what you're trying to solve. Are you trying to add novelty to players because they're kind of bored with their class, they want to see something new? Are you trying to monetize because you're selling the classes, and so you need the player base to buy this new class? How much are you going to throw game balance off? Like, sometimes players don't want you to screw up the game balance constantly. They're like, hey, the game is in a pretty good state.
Right.
We don't need it to get thrown off.
Your thoughts on locking classes to certain races, factions, and sex?
In general, I feel like players choose what their character looks like because they like the way that character looks.
Yeah.
And once you lock them out of something, it's harder for you just lose that option. Like gnomes in World of Warcraft, they're a little cute race. Some people love gnomes, and if they want to play a gnome, they want to play a gnome. They don't want to feel like they're supposed to play the gnome because, let's say, gnomes are the best rogues in the game because of stat bonuses or because of something like that.
Racials and stuff, yeah.
Yeah, I generally say let players look like whatever they want to look like, and then put all the mechanics on the class. Like if I was making World of Warcraft today, I would probably say any race could be any class, and there's no racial bonuses because it should just be a preference. You like Tauren? Great. Tauren.
I'm glad you said that because that's one of the biggest turnoffs I had personally had with World of Warcraft. I did play a little bit of Shadowlands and BFA just a little bit. I'm not the most experienced WoW guy, but one of the biggest gripes that I had was, number one, all my friends played Horde, so now I have to choose a race that's on Horde. And then when of those classes, on top of that, I had to choose a class that had the racial passive that I wanted to play for PvP because I was a PvP guy. And I was kind of like, oh my, and everyone's like, oh, if you're Alliance, you gotta go human, or you know what I mean, because of the stun resist or whatever, and I'm just like, oh, it was such a turnoff for me. Yeah.
But I get it. Again, coming from like the Dungeons and Dragons roots, you just expect, oh, I'm an elf, I should be better at some things than a human, and that I know that's where it came from. I just think in terms of where we are with video games, like just let people look like whatever they want to look like and don't worry about it.
Right. So as far as letting people look like what they want to look like, I will also say, like, I don't like, if I'm going to play a human, I'd rather be able to customize my character to really make it look like how I like it, how I prefer it to look like. And I know there's plenty of people that literally spend hours in the character customization, really customizing their game, even though they're never going to actually see their character's face because of a helmet or a top-down view or whatever that may be, right? What are your thoughts on games and MMOs that do have a deep customization? Is that important to you as a gamer, or do you not really care?
So as a gamer, it's not something I care a ton about. Like, I don't spend hours making my character. I understand some players that's really important. And some of the like Eastern MMOs, there's like Moonlight Blade? Like, it's crazy the amount of customization you can do. It's like, I mean, people have seen, in the West games that offer a lot of customization, but it's nothing like a game like Moonlight Blade, where it's like a human simulator. Like anything you could possibly imagine you can do. And people will like create K-pop stars and stuff because you can get to that.
And some games that really it doesn't end up having an impact, and some it does. I think that in Guild Wars, it shows me my character all the time. And so I'm always in these cutscenes during story or things like that. Final Fantasy has moved to having this portrait that shows up at the beginning of dungeons and PvP. And so you see your character a lot more than you did historically. But then there's games like EVE Online where I'm just in my ship. I'm in my ship. I have nothing to do with that. And so it doesn't end up being something that really matters. So then there's this question of like, why even spend that long? But I think it's about just not yucking other people's yum. And I think that Final Fantasy allows you to largely be whatever you want. World of Warcraft does still have some of this stuff still in the game because it was there before, but they've been pulling out the faction restrictions. They've been pulling out the race restrictions. They've been increasing the customization. It's honestly why it was so weird that they chose to add a new race and a new class and then tie them to each other. And then within that new class, they have more visual variety within that race in game than what is available to the player, because it's such a stark contrast to what the rest of the races are doing, to what the rest of the classes are doing. And that's so weird. And so there's every once in a while, there's these elements where it feels like they're making such progress. And then there's times where they just put that all the way to the side.
Level of fidelity.
Right.
And that's the player expectation. I think the downside is, do you want to spend 3 hours doing your character's eyebrows before you even like jump in the game and decide if you like it or not?
Right. True. To kind of close the subject out, a lot of that does depend on the budget, right? Because I'd imagine a game like Moonlight Blade, those games that offer that feature, that's a big budget. That is not cheap to add into the game, right?
That is big budget, yeah.
Yeah. I feel like it did
like a whole team to build that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, if it's a mobile game, like you might not be able to even see that level of fidelity. Like, yeah, you have like a really cool birthmark next to your eyelash, but no one gets close just to see it.
Exactly. All right, so the last section I want to talk to you about is the PvP section. If I'm going to be realistic about it, is that every MMO, even WoW, where the PvP scene is very, very big, I'd say probably the biggest PvP scene of all MMOs. Even a game like WoW, the population of PvP is somewhere between 1% to 10%, right? Is that a pretty big factor?
10% of your players could still be a lot of players, right? Like, sure, 10% absolutely. Of your players may play warriors, or even fewer than that.
So when you're designing this game, do you design something for a small percentage of players? Keep in mind that the top end PvE content is often cleared by single digit percentages in these games. It's incredibly small. The percentage of the player population that finishes non-mandatory stories is incredibly small. In Final Fantasy, the story is completed by a huge percentage of players because it's mandatory.
A few moments later.
We're gonna talk about PvP. It's a small percentage of the game, but it's something that is incredibly impactful. A lot more people view it than just the ones that participate it. And everything in an MMORPG is consumed by a very small number of players relative to the whole, unless it's mandatory. Each individual difficulty of rating, the higher the difficulty, the lower the percentage, and they plummet to abysmal rates. How many people engage with the various optional side systems, including but not limited to PvP. It's a bunch of small different ways to play that create your unique way to play, that create enough unique ways to play to draw in audiences the size of what a lot of these games are able to draw. And I don't just mean the biggest two in the room. When you think about the smallest MMOs, the failures of MMOs, you are talking about tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of unique players. And I live in a relatively large suburb of Dallas-Fort Worth, and you are counting suburbs of Dallas-Fort Worth in tens of thousands or small hundreds of thousands of people. And that makes up what feels like an entire city. So the idea that a city shares a singular form of MMORPG entertainment is very large. So a game doesn't have to be millions for it to have a lot of unique people.
All right, so the last section I want to talk to you about is the PvP section. If I'm going to be realistic about it, is that every MMO, even WoW, where the PvP scene is very, very big, I'd say probably the biggest PvP scene of all MMOs. Even a game like WoW, the population of PvP is somewhere between 1% to 10%, right? Is that a pretty big factor?
10% of your players could still be a lot of players, right? Like, sure, 10% absolutely. Of your players may play warriors, or even fewer than that. So it's still a lot of people. It just doesn't fit with some games. Some games want to be more story-based. They want to be more cooperative. PvP does take a lot of effort to balance.
Sure.
Like,
that's the balancing thing.
PvP is so easy compared to balancing PvP. The monster doesn't care if it's stunned for 6 seconds, but 6 seconds is an eternity for a player to be stunned.
Absolutely.
Yeah, PvP is very hard to get right. On World of Warcraft, we made it twice as hard for us because we didn't want to have rules work differently for the most part. We started to get away from that at the end of my tenure, and I'm not even sure what they do today. But But I say rules work differently. Like, well, this stuns a monster for 6 seconds, but a person for only 1 second, or it does less damage to players, or that kind of thing, so that you give yourself at least some knobs to turn to be able to balance both systems. What really sucks is when PvP players have to just eat something because it was added for PvE, or PvE gets nerfed because of PvP. It's like, oh, well, I don't PvP at all, I just raid, but now I'm a less effective healer this week because you guys couldn't balance your PvP game. Like, that's the part as a player and a dev I really want to avoid.
I'm very much looking forward to the PvP in Riot MMO if it's added to the game. I know there's nothing confirmed about the game, but if it is added, I think I'd be very, very excited to try it out. Now, with that said, though, one of the reasons why PvP isn't as successful in Lost Ark is because of how difficult it is and the experience that you get as a new player. If you're playing against someone that knows what he's doing and you're a little bit less experienced, your experience in PvP is just getting stun locked and just dying. Like, whether it's getting one shot or 2 comboed or 3 comboed, you're just going to go in there, get staggered or get stunned, and then it's over. And that's just like a bad experience for a lot of people, right? Generally speaking, like, what are your thoughts on like the combat of PvP?
Yeah, I mean, we've learned a lot of this from League of Legends.
So first of all, like, they're talking about, there is a huge degree of Canon's incredibly right that there is a huge degree of skill in player versus player as opposed to a static test. And so, like, how do you handle the difference in player skill? Separating ranked and unranked PvP, I always prefer ranked over unranked, and people assume that that means you're sweatier. But remember that in ranked, there's also people that are ranked low. And so I like ranked PvP because I want to play against people of my skill level, not a random slice of the internet. If I am a particularly bad PvPer, in many games I am, I don't mind if they put me down in bronze wood crap league and I can be down at the bottom and I can play with the other crap people. And then I can still win about half my matches. And so I really like ranked systems for that reason. ELOs do a very good job. Otherwise, you're forced to be better than average to have a consistently better than average experience. Call of Duty was a huge game for my brothers growing up and like, well, in all through college. And it took me years of joining them and being awful before I became better than average. And it wasn't fun other than the fact that I was with them. And while I was in lobbies with them, we were tearing people up. As opposed to Halo, which typically has ranked lobbies, I've always had more fun in Halo because when I'm not playing with them, I can simply get moved down by the degree that I am worse than them. And so if I am a Bronze League player, I can get put in Bronze League matches. And as I improve, I can work my way up those ranks. And so I've always enjoyed ranked for that reason. But in MMORPGs, there's another thing that Ghostcrawler hit on here that, do you make the system function differently? He said that in World of Warcraft, while he was there, they didn't want them to function differently. I think World of Warcraft has tried to take that very, very literally. If something stuns for 6 seconds, it should stun for 6 seconds. We don't want 2 tooltips. Final Fantasy has taken this totally opposite. If we're going to kind of have spectrums here, the opposite end is that it is a totally different set of abilities that function totally differently. The way that a warrior functions in PvP in Final Fantasy is different. Now, it is the same class fantasy, and PvP is restricted to a small number of abilities made available at a very low level, and effectively what it feels like is the class from PvE that's big and complex and has 30 abilities or whatever on the bar, effectively goes to sleep at night and has a fever dream about how awesome it could be. And it describes to you the next morning the memory of this dream about where it was a god. And every class is effectively living out this 5 to 10 button or whatever dream version of itself. And they're all in there. So if you have a big 3-minute cooldown that's being awesome, you might be using that every 20-30 seconds in PvP. And so you're getting right to the good stuff. There are people that love that so much, like, this is so fun, they should do this in PvE. I don't think it works there. I think it works really, really well in something like PvP, and then leaving all that big complexity and balance and utility on the bar for things like PvE encounter design. And so I think separating them to that degree has worked really, really well in the Endwalker expansion for Final Fantasy XIV at bringing a mode into the game that has traditionally been a small percentage of the population up to something where a larger percentage of the population can enjoy it than has up to this point. There are games that go in between and they have abilities that, you know, maybe damage abilities, the amount of damage they do varies for players versus not, because players have a lot less life than monsters, and so monster damage against monsters has to be a lot higher. Or maybe stun things in ability, like they're saying it's not fun to be stunned for 6 seconds, but it's nice to stun a monster for 6 seconds. So maybe stuns in particular are weakened or have a diminishing returns on players that they don't have when you're running dungeons or raids. And so you see games balance this. And that's really going to vary for each game what makes the most sense. He says that Canon says that World of Warcraft has the largest PvP community, and it probably does in raw numbers. And then he mentions the percentage as a separate point in how to, and on that point, I do wonder what the percentages are in more PvP-based game. What percentage of New World players are sometimes PvP flagged within, let's say, a month? Within monthly active users, what percentage of players spend 5 minutes or more doing PvP style content in that game where it is more PvP focused than World of Warcraft?
Legends and Valorant is players want to have some agency. It really sucks when you feel like there was nothing I could do. You want to learn from the encounter and think about what would you do differently next time? Like, oh, well, I used my CC immunity too soon, or I should have countered with this earlier. Like, then you feel like even though you lost, you kind of know what you're going to do better next time. The reason like the stun lock to one shot feels so bad is you're like, well, what could I have done? There was nothing I could have done. I got jumped, I got stunned, I couldn't get out of it, and then I got killed before I could get out of the stun. Like, there's just no reaction there. There's nothing you can do. Right. And yeah, if you got ganked out in the open world and they were much more powerful than you, that's a little different. But if it's supposed to be a fair fight and it just came down to like who got the CC off first, that's not player skill, right? That's not like a back and forth. That's just someone got lucky and that determined the outcome.
Making it even more ping sensitive as well, because ping is also something that we have to deal with in the West as well. Forgot to actually ask this earlier, and I was just reminded by this based off of our PvP talk. Tab targeting versus action combat. This is another very big discussion amongst all MMOs. What do you prefer, and what do you like seeing in MMOs? Are you an action combat guy, or are you a tab target guy? And then you have games like Guild Wars, by the way, that's like a mixture of both. What are your thoughts?
It's like a lot of my answers. There are, like you said, there's strengths and weaknesses to both. I've probably played more tab targeting games than action games. Maybe it's just because action games haven't had as much time to mature and they'll get there. But a lot of MMO combat is complicated enough that trying to like stay on the target, thinking that someone was in range when they weren't, like those are pretty frustrating moments, and they feel like you're fighting the game versus fighting the the enemy or the other player.
Right. So
ultimately, a game is either tab target or action target. If there is an option, it's going to come down to which one has the better outcome. It's really nice that they offer it as an option for people that maybe due to the way they play with a controller, or people that have a preference, or people that have a disability where one is easier, that's made available. But ultimately, if there is a version of the game that allows you to stay on target, that is objectively better than having to aim your abilities. Because in a high stress, high difficulty moment, that person won't miss versus the other person will, unless you suddenly add a miss chance to tab target that's not there on people that aim, in which case, as soon as you master the skill where your accuracy outpaces the determined accuracy of tab target, you are objectively better. There will be a better. Every game is either one or is the other. So it's an incredibly interesting question as far as what's Ghostcrawler's preference. I wonder what Canon's preference is as well. I like them as a mix. I really like playing a little bit of both. Some of my favorite times in Final Fantasy has been when I've been playing Destiny at the same kind of pace in my life, because I like the act of having those separately. I've been mentioning Call of Duty because I've been having a lot of fun in the new Call of Duty, and I play that when I'm not on a tab targeter during the day on stream.
So which game do you feel like you enjoyed the most as far as the combat goes? So like this kind of ties into that. I would
say that I enjoy tab targeting more, but my hope is that there is room for action combat games. Like I said, I love Dark Souls, I love God of War. Those certainly aren't tab targeting, and they're very fun visceral combat.
Right.
And hopefully, action combat and MMOs will get to that point too. But I think it has a long way to go.
Really? Okay, interesting. How much more expensive is it for an action combat game compared to tab targeting? I have no idea, but I would assume that it's more expensive to have an MMO that's designed around action combat. compared to tab targeting? That I could be completely off on that.
It's a good question. You have to, you need better server ping. You need better server responsiveness and good prediction for what's going to happen, because generally in action games, your positioning, your distance to the target matter a lot. On the other hand, like, shooters do pretty well. They have like very, very, important, being able to get a headshot or something like that is down to the microseconds sometimes. So I think it can be done. I think ranged combat is generally easier to design than melee combat. And a lot, Destiny is largely a ranged game, but a lot of the MMOs we're talking about are fantasy, and there's an expectation of I'm going to be up close fighting someone with a sword. And so getting the melee combat to work when you have to be up close, you have to be on top of someone, the swing generally takes longer than just firing another bullet. I think those are all the challenges that action combat is still working on. But, right. Pretty good in Lost Ark, feels pretty good in Diablo.
I've never thought of it as a cost thing. I've never thought of action RPG versus tab target as a cost thing. So it's an incredibly interesting question. And it heavily shifts very quickly to what they're talking about with ping. How does it feel? Which starts to be, do you have a game that's designed for regional play versus not? And so if you have a game that takes 100 players in a map to feel good, then all of a sudden, if you have players from different regions that want to play together because they both have the same objective at the same time, or they're just friends online or whatever, then all of a sudden that doesn't feel good, because for one player, they're playing with worse ping. On the other hand, if you have a tab target, that's okay, because the ping is something that can be overcome at an easier degree to action RPG. So if you're in something that's more lobby-based, like Warframe or Diablo or something like that, you can afford to have more of that like quick twitch reaction type moment in the moment-to-moment gameplay. And it doesn't feel like it's penalizing you as heavily as when there's 100 players present, and any lag that somebody gets either local on their machine or with their connection to the server suddenly drastically determines your outcome. So I never really thought of it as a cost thing.
Diablo, so
yeah, it does, but I feel like it does because it's isometric, it's top down.
Right.
I feel like it's completely different if you're doing it in 3D.
It'd be so frustrating of someone like jumping around behind you, in a real action combat game that was over the shoulder camera. That would just be like, where'd they go? You're constantly. But that's the part I dislike the most about PvP and MMOs is the jumping around, the circling. That's not my fantasy of martial arts or sword fighting, of like someone hopping to make them more difficult to hit, right?
Gotcha. Right. Do you I don't know if you've watched the competitive BDO arena tournaments, but like if you watch them, it literally looks like one of those Chinese kung fu movies where the characters have like teleporting powers. They're just like going like this, or those Dragon Ball Z, fight scenes where they're just going like this. It's actually kind of insane. Do you prefer something that's a little bit slower, a little bit more boomer friendly, or do you like that off the wall? Like you look at it, you're like, holy shit, like this is crazy. This is insane.
I like it when players can demonstrate skill, and I like that goes for rating too. Is it doesn't have to be one size fits all. Like what makes a fun PvP bout to watch is seeing extreme skill in play. And so I think it's fine if some players can pull off like ridiculous moves that not everyone else can.
Yeah. What a graceful response for being effectively called a boomer. To really target on age for somebody that's like you have the opportunity to sit down with an icon in the industry. Whether or not you knew who he was before this interview, the moment you look up who he is, right? The moment you Google it, you're like, oh, there are not that many people with a stronger pedigree, even if you had no idea who this was before this interview, right? You come to find out that it would be like meeting somebody and finding out that they were the vice president in your country or whatever. You may not know all of your vice presidents all the way back, as opposed to you may recognize president names. You may not know congressmen and senators, but they are people that rose to an incredible degree in their field. And once you know what they are, as soon as you Google them, you should immediately be like, oh, what a big opportunity. And so like that comment was just like slid in there, and he's done it a couple of times. And I don't think it's a dig on Canon at all. I think if anything, it's just an opportunity for Ghostcrawler to either come across really, really calm and humble and approachable, because if there is accidental disrespect, which is all I believe it is, if anything about this hurts Ghostcrawler's feelings, him getting his feelings hurt would look incredibly childish. But like, it's a mistake that I don't think Canon's alone in not necessarily maybe knowing some of the achievements of Ghostcrawler and some of the things he said as far as like the Blizzard acquisition, when was Ghostcrawler involved, like that would take a lot of research or just long time knowledge. In specifically the overlap with him, like Ghostcrawler may know backward and forward, the games he's worked on, but he doesn't know the ones that Canon knows. And so Canon's like, have you ever seen this PvP tournament? So they just have different life experiences, even if they have the same number of years in the industry. So I don't know. I thought that was really graceful the way he responded to kind of laughing off. Do you prefer more of that boomer? Like slow combat that's for old people. Do you prefer some of that old people play? I thought that was really graceful. And then to respond with what is honestly a very cognizant answer, just to say, I prefer something where there's high skill being shown. And so for me, one of the things that makes MMORPGs very hard to thrive on Twitch is that it's not always easy to tell what's going on. If you look at World of Warcraft Race for World First, which just ended, congratulations Echo. If you look at the Final Fantasy XIV upcoming race at the end of January for Ultimate, if you go look at Guild Wars when they have their World First stuff, there are so many different visual indicators happening simultaneously on screen for what the different classes are doing, for what the boss is doing, for what is just general beautiful noise, that it's very, very, very hard to know what it is, even if you're somebody who's playing the game. Which means anybody who does not play that game or has been away for a long time, you don't stand a chance. You have no idea what is going on. And if like I found myself incredibly frustrating as I get more and more into watching some of these World First races and watching some of the commentary and stuff, that like if I don't know a class outside of my own, I don't stand a chance. And I play these games, and I have played many of these games for over a decade. So how is somebody who maybe just downloaded the game or they're interested in the game, how are they supposed to follow this? And so I do think what he's talking about there has a lot of truth to it, that if you could make something fun to watch, and know that there's high skill taking place, I think that's a lot of what made Fortnite so watchable, even by people that don't play Fortnite. I think that's what makes a lot of these games very easy to understand. I don't have to watch football all year around in the United States to understand the Super Bowl. It's explained heavily by the announcers. They have all these visual indicators that they can drag on screen to show an arrow in the play-by-play breakdown. Right? When a game is simple to understand and there's not a bunch of visual noise, watching the World Cup, if that was your first time to enjoy soccer, football, whatever you want to call it, that's exciting. Counter-Strike fills the stadiums. I see a guy, I see him point the gun. It looks like if he shoots the other guy before that guy shoots him, he wins. I got it. And it's a lot easier to get into than some of the crazier modes within MMORPGs, just visually, because you get it. I can see it with my own eyes.
Yeah. Okay, so the last thing that I'll ask you, and we could just do this really quick, but it's the lore, and this is I don't know Necrit. I hope I'm saying his name correctly.
I've heard both Necrit and Necrit.
Necrit. Okay, I apologize if you watch this video, but his videos are fantastic, and I saw you on your Twitter actually link the video, and you're like, I cannot confirm nor deny this. Right? And I've been studying a lot of the lore myself, or as much as I can, with this game, because I definitely want to cover it. I want to know everything about it. How important is it for you guys to stay true to that lore for the MMO? Is it going to be a little bit of variation, or are you guys going to be like trying to recreate that story within the MMO?
Yeah, so like, again, without giving any announcements, I could just tell you how we at Riot overall think about it, which is we want players to have that investment. And if you feel like oh, everything's fluid, everything could change at a moment's notice, it's hard to be invested in the lore because like nothing matters, nothing has stakes. It's just going to constantly change or be retconned. So the way we think about it is there are core truths about the world, about the characters, and if you violate those, that's pretty risky. So
Gotcha.
Batman is a billionaire who goes out at night, dressed as a bat. If you made a Batman story where he goes around killing people with a sword, people can be like, that doesn't feel like Batman.
Yeah.
Like, what do you doing here, right? But if you tell a story where you say like, hey, Batman's favorite food is lobster thermidor, and then you break that in another story, players are a lot more willing to forgive. It doesn't have to be like perfect consistency. Now, there are people who want perfect consistency, and they get annoyed when there's anything that's out of sorts. But we think, for the most part, for a lot of players, they just kind of want to feel like that's true to their characters. It's like, oh, Garen would do that. That feels like something Garen would do. Or Kali behaves the way I thought she would based on watching cinematics and KDA and things like that. So that's kind of the level we try to deliver on. And,
Right. When you were watching Necrit's video, were you like, oh my gosh, these guys, they're good? or was it like, what was the reaction you had?
He's been a fan of for a while, so he picks up a lot. There's things he totally gets wrong, and he'd probably be the first to admit it, where he's like, oh, look, I'm going to connect the dots, and we're just like, nope, totally wrong. But that's why the speculation's fun. If it was very easy to guess everything, it wouldn't be fun to talk about, because you're like, wait, is that true? Is it, that's the fun part.
Right. It's funny you say that, because one of the things that I'm really curious about when it comes to the races for the Riot MMO, because like one of your races has like 20 races within it, like the hybrid, right? The hybrid race, right? Like
they talk about the Messiah, like
yes,
art,
yeah.
Animal,
yeah, because then each one of those could be like a race, or if it's just gonna be a few. I don't know. I'm just kind of curious as to how you guys are gonna do it. Is there anything?
Because like we don't have elves and dwarves, we don't have a lot of standard fantasy races. It's honestly a very human centric IP.
Right.
A lot of the characters you see depicted are human. Like almost everyone in Arcane was human. That's just the world we made, for better or worse.
I will ask this question on behalf of the entire MMO community, but the last question I will leave you with is there anything that you can say about the Riot MMO that hasn't been shared already? Is there anything? The smallest little thing.
Is there anything? I guess I will say players have made a lot of assumptions, and some of them are just flat out wrong, and that's been fun for us to be like, oh yeah, they think they figured this all out, and they've totally gotten it wrong. So that's been fun for us.
Has there ever been anyone that has said something that would be the equivalent of
Game of Thrones spoiler here?
Gonna be sitting on the Iron Throne at the end, like where you're like, oh my god, this guy, how did he come up with that? He's actually right. Has there been anyone that you've seen?
If you're talking about like the biggest, darkest secrets, crazy story twist, no, I don't think I've seen that yet.
Okay.
But they also, we haven't said much about it all what the story is.
Yeah, everything is really mysterious right now.
One of the things Riot has done is gotten players to the point where they trust us to get it right. Like we may not get it right away, and we'll make mistakes, but given enough time and feedback, we'll try to do the right thing.
Okay, so you obviously can't give us any dates in regards to anything, but would you be able to tell us maybe when you'll be able to say, hey, I think we're going to start releasing some information now? Is that something that like is still years away, even that, or is that something that we can maybe even expect in 2023? If you can't answer that, then obviously that's fine.
The way I'll answer it is we want to be able to communicate when we have real information.
Right, gotcha. Well,
probably when we're comfortable with that is when we'll start talking about it more, and again, this is not going to be what we call in the business the grand reveal, where suddenly one day, here's everything.
Here's everything.
It will be a slow trickle that goes on for a long time.
Well, Mr. Greg, I really appreciate you making the time.
The end there was really sustainable. Greg said what was largely said of WoW recently. I want to release good content, but I know it's not going to be perfect. And when it's not perfect, I want to have a plan to fix it. So good communication, content with as few bugs as possible, and the ability to fix it in a timely manner. Once you made a mistake, like that's fine. People make mistakes. That's not right. You have a plan, and so I think that was great. giving him the opportunity to reveal something here if he wanted to is a fair ask. That's what people would have put in the comments. How come you didn't ask him if there was a... So, giving him that question at the end, even if odds are he's going to say, no, that's okay. It's still a long way off, and I think anything they reveal too soon, A, it doesn't get to be exciting later when they want the hype, and B, if they change their minds on something, it makes them look like liars, and they are still in the development process. And you do not want the creative minds to have a solution, and they go to put that solution out, and they're like, well, we can't do that because we already told them that it would be, different, and we can't. Now we're obligated because we made some statement 5 years out from release. Like we don't have even a ballpark on release in this. So good.
Time for doing this interview with me. I wanted to have an opportunity to talk to the man that's directing it and get to know you as a person. If there's anything that I've learned from Lost Ark, if the consumers and the players have a lot of respect and love for the director that's running the game, then that really goes a long ways. And I wish nothing but the best for the future of this game. Thank you.
It's wonderful. I've missed being able to talk to players about what we're working on, and we can do this again when we actually have something to say.
I'd love to.
And go into more detail.
Oh,
and I know something else I'll say is it's not just going to be me. Like, this team really enjoys interacting and talking to players. So there's going to be a lot of us out there. I'm not just going to be like the only spokesperson for the product.
That any closing comments or statements that you'd like to make before we round this out?
I guess I would encourage people to keep sharing feedback with the games you like, with the developers. They're not always going to be able to answer, but they, even if it hurts sometimes, generally they do really care about the feedback and they want to know.
Sure.
It's hard when you have like super passionate community and you're a small developer, like some of these developers are, but don't give up. If you're passionate about the game and it's something you love, then don't get discouraged.
Sure. And what would be the best way to give feedback to the devs right now? Because I don't think there's any official channel set up. I think people just reply to your Twitter comments right now.
Yeah, I meant that in general for any game that you
Sure.
love. For us specifically, there's a lot of ways to communicate, and we generally go where players are. So when discussions are happening on Twitch or in Discord or Reddit or whatever, we know about those and we pay attention. We can't always chime in yet, but we'll get to the point where we're in the conversations as well.
Well, Greg, once again, thank you so much. That's going to do it for this video. I really appreciate you and your time. Once again, big shout outs to the Riot team and everyone that was a part of this. Thank you so much. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below, and I will see you in the next video.
Awesome.